Chapter 373. Mr. Qin, can I give you a ride? The man in front of him was Wang Junqing, who sat at the same table as Qin Shi on the day Nian entered the school. Perhaps it was because of his age, but Wang Junqing always gave off a mature and steady vibe. It was what people often referred to as manliness. When this kind of man smiled, even as a man, he could not help but be captivated by his charm and seriously think about every word he said. This was the charm of a mature man and had nothing to do with gender. If an analogy was to be made, a mature man was like a bottle of aged wine. The moment the bottle was opened, the fragrance was enough to attract everyone's attention. Obviously, Wang Junqing wanted to use this opportunity to talk to Qin Shi. But unfortunately, after Qin Shi heard him, he waved his hand and smiled. No need, my house is nearby. It's faster to take the small road back. After that, Qin Shi did not even give Wang Junqing a chance to speak again. He turned around and walked along the sidewalk. Brother Wang, who is this guy? Since he's so shameless, why don't I just go and have a chat with him? Zhao Ziyu was sitting in the driver's seat. After seeing Qin Shi leave, he suddenly felt like he was insulted. He almost got out of the car to teach Qin Shi a lesson. Talk. Oh. Kidnap him and talk? Wang Junqing coldly interrupted him. Hearing this, Zhao Ziyu suddenly became like a frosted eggplant and completely withered. It was not difficult to see that the two of them were not ordinary friends. Instead, it was more like a superior and subordinate relationship. Didn't you always say that you have eyes and ears in Beijing? It's been more than a month, how come there is no reliable news at all? Didn't we already investigate to Zhonghai? We even found the household register for you. You ask me, this guy is just a bumpkin. Brother Wang, why do you care so much about him? How can a bumpkin get a kid into this school? Wang Junqing casually asked a rhetorical question and directly made Zhao Ziyu speechless. Actually, thinking about it, it made sense. Even though it was just a small kindergarten, the water inside was deep. From the first day the children stepped into this kindergarten, regardless of their future academic performance, they would definitely follow the pre-planned path all the way forward. They would go through childhood, primary, junior, high, and finally plunge into the top schools in the country such as Qing, Bei, Ren La, and so on. The only possible fork in the road was the choice between politics and business. Those in business could choose to study abroad, while those in politics had to stay in the country to further their studies. This was indeed the case. While the bumpkins were still warming up at the starting line, others were already drinking champagne and celebrating at the finish line. However, this was not to say that society was unfair. After all, ever since the fall of the Qing dynasty, whose ancestors were not farmers, other people had to go through at least 3 generations of accumulation before their children and grandchildren could enjoy the wealth they had today. Alright, let's leave it at that. I just thought that this person wasn't simple, so I wanted to make friends with him. Since she's unwilling, let's put this matter aside for now. Anyway, the child is still young. Let's see how it goes in the future. The car with the Beijing A license plate slowly drove away. At this time, Qin Shi, who had already walked more than 100 meters away, suddenly turned her head to look at the car. Her face revealed a thoughtful expression. Time passed day by day. It was so peaceful that there was not a trace of ripple. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. Today was November 1st. It was Halloween abroad and Little Singles Day in China. The autumn air was refreshing, and the smell of osmanthus was wafting in the air. It was a good time to play. And from National Day until now, the only good news during this period was Gu Yao's soul had finally stabilized and could move freely without the soul crystal. Although the soul could not speak, it could convey the emotions in her heart through the soul. Therefore, the moment Qin Shi released her, he sensed the true feelings in Gu Yao's heart. She was very happy. Happy from the bottom of her heart. At this time, Gu Yao finally regained a little bit of her humanity. Although her IQ was still slightly lower than that of ordinary people, at least she was no longer a ferocious ghost who lacked brains. In addition to this matter, something else happened that made Qin Shi quite depressed. That was, Nian no longer called him Papa in a coquettish voice. Thinking about this, Qin Shi's heart immediately gave birth to 10,000 depression. That was because he always felt that the coquettish Papa sounded very intimate, but the clear Dad sounded more distant. Here he had to mention the little guy's growth experience. Because Aunt Zhang was from Sichuan, the little guy grew up with her, and inevitably there was a little Sichuan flavor in his accent. The teachers in the kindergarten were all from Shangjing, so their pronunciation was naturally the most standard Mandarin pronunciation. For the teachers, a child's inaccurate pronunciation was a big problem. Therefore, when they were in school, they would always patiently correct the little guy's pronunciation. As time went by, of course, Papa was gone and then only Dad was left. In this regard, Qin simply had to suffer in silence. There was a feeling of unspeakable bitterness. Bitter. Really bitter. Fortunately, other than this bitter matter, there was nothing else to worry about during this period. Although Qin Ruoying's cultivation progress was still very slow, Qin was not anxious because of this. This was because he believed that as long as the Adumbra flower was refined into a pill, Ying would definitely be able to use it to step into the diviner stage. However, how precious was the Adumbra flower? In the absence of other materials, even he did not dare to act rashly. Therefore, after nearly a month of thinking, Qin finally came up with a more feasible prescription and prepared to officially start refining the pill. However, at this moment, the spirit energy tide appeared again. In the blink of an eye, black clouds rolled and covered half the sky. After a few thunderous rumbles, the heavy rain began to fall. Qin walked out of the room and frowned. After observing for a while, he realized that the tide this time was not very turbulent. The center was also rather far from Shangjing. Seeing this, Qin looked as if he had seen something happy. After shaking his head with a smile, he turned around and went back into the room. He was prepared to stay by Qin Ruoying's side and study her symptoms. The reason why Qin did not immediately move to contain the tide was because he had reached an agreement with the old man. Therefore, the moment the spirit energy tide appeared, the entire Daiyu Island was in an uproar. In just a moment, hundreds of diviners suddenly flew out of the island like birds, flying in flocks toward the center of the tide. It was as if hundreds of birds were flying through the sky. It was so majestic that it was a rare sight. Chapter 374. The celestial beings were out hunting, patrolling the heavens. Ever since Emperor Qin burned the books and buried the scholars, such a grand event had not happened in the divine land for a long time. Daiyu Island's magical formation was activated. Over 300 celestial beings rushed valiantly toward the center of the tide, facing the rolling black clouds, flashing lightning, and rolling thunder. This moment was destined to be recorded in the annals of the Jiang clan. Because from this day on, the Jiang clan was no longer a clan of sinners abandoned by the divine ancestor. Under the leadership of the old ancestor, they would compose an epic that belonged to the Jiang clan in this divine great land that was once again filled with vitality. In fact, after the great ancestor made this decision, everyone knew what they were going to face. But at the same time, they also understood one thing, and that was, the strong often rose from humble beginnings. In front of the great world, the overall strength of Daiyu Island was as insignificant as an ant. It could be said that any divine general from the Heavenly Gate had the ability to massacre the entire Daiyu Island. After all, 300 celestial beings sounded like a lot, but they were only 300 pseudo-core immortal cultivators. They had not even truly condensed their gene dan. Of course, if these 300 celestial beings formed a formation and attacked and retreated together, even a divine general would not dare to face them head-on. However, this was only a theoretical concept. Because a divine general was not a wooden dummy. He only needed to employ guerrilla tactics. Through constant harassment, sneak attacks, and ambushes, how long would it take for him to kill 300 celestial beings? The gap between the two realms was simply too big. 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000. This was what an immortal cultivator should be capable of. If it had been in the past, the Jiang clan would definitely not have the delusion of going against the great world. They were just a lowly clan of sinners. When the spiritual energy was exhausted, they were like sand lizards wandering in the desert. They could only rely on eating maggots and rotten meat to sustain their lives. But suddenly times had changed. With the continuous recovery of spiritual energy, the desert gradually became an oasis. Looking at the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards swarming toward the oasis, the sand lizards hesitated. Should they continue to live lowly, or should they stand up straight and fight the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards to protect the oasis that originally belonged to them? If he took a gamble, he might end up enraging the ferocious beast, and in the end he would end up without a corpse. Then he could continue to hide in the soil for the rest of his life, eating maggots and rotting meat. Thank goodness. The Jiang clan still retained the last trace of bravery. So, even if they had to take the risk of their entire clan being annihilated, the Jiang clan still had to fight for that beautiful future under the lead of the old ancestor. Perhaps even the old ancestor didn't realize, their present conduct is a perfect reflection of the famous saying, natural selection, survival of the fittest. Compete with the heavens, compete with the earth, and compete with people. Competition was the unchanging truth in the hearts of the immortal cultivators. To Qin Shi, defeating the spirit chi tide was just a small matter with a casual swing of his sword. But to the Jiang clan, this was a huge matter that could only be barely accomplished if they went all out. The center of the tide was not far from Daiyu Island. Under Jiang Yuankui's guidance, the Jiang clan's celestials soon arrived at their destination. On a vast and boundless ocean. Because they moved quickly, they were fortunate enough to witness the occurrence of the heavenly anomaly. They saw a waterspout suddenly rising from the surface of the ocean. In just a short moment, the waterspout had already risen to the clouds and was tightly connected with the thunderclouds in the sky. From afar, the waterspout was like a pillar supporting the heavens and the earth by itself. Everyone was stunned. After all, this was the first time they witnessed a heavenly anomaly with their own eyes. In front of such a huge natural phenomenon, the 300+ people were simply as insignificant as a speck of dust. Boom, boom. Coupled with the deafening sound of thunder in the sky from time to time, many people started to have thoughts of retreating. The old ancestor wanted them to go against the heavens. Faced with such a violent natural phenomenon, not to mention the others, even the leader, Jiang Yuankui, couldn't help but frown. However, just as everyone was hesitating, a figure suddenly plunged into the waterspout in front of him and then laughed out loud. A bunch of trash. A mere waterspout scared you all? Didn't you guys always want to know how I broke through? Then you all better watch carefully. The person who spoke was Jiang Jingqing, who had been beaten into the ground by Qin Shi a few days ago. After this period of recuperation, Jiang Jingqing's injuries had finally healed by 70 to 80%. He didn't expect that as soon as he appeared today, his wild and unruly nature would once again appear. Actually, among all the people present, Jiang Jingqing's talent wasn't the most outstanding, but he was the first Jiang clan member to step into the heavenly man realm. Therefore, everyone had always been curious as to how he had comprehended the key to it. However, curiosity was just curiosity. Due to Jiang Jingqing's annoying personality, no one had specifically asked him for advice. Who would have thought that he would actually take the initiative to say it today? In fact, how could Jiang Jingqing be talented? He must have a screw loose in his head. When a normal person saw such a shocking heavenly anomaly, their first reaction would definitely be to avoid it. However, Jiang Jingqing insisted on doing the opposite. No matter what kind of heavenly anomaly it was, he wanted to use this opportunity to train himself. His breakthrough stemmed from the spiritual energy tide that had appeared last time. It was just like how Yang Gui used the black iron heavy sword to practice swordsmanship under the waterfall, increasing his strength through resisting the waterfall. When the spiritual energy tide appeared last time, Jiang Jingqing just happened to be cultivating nearby. He felt that the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was especially turbulent, so he dived in without thinking and stepped into the heavenly man realm in one go. There was definitely danger. After all, the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was far superior to the outside world. If one's cultivation was insufficient or had an unstable foundation, they might suffer from chi deviation if they weren't careful. They might even explode and die because they couldn't withstand the enormous spiritual energy. However, for a cultivator like Jiang Jingqing who had been trapped in the heavenly man realm for many years due to the exhaustion of spiritual energy, how could this be dangerous? This was simply a great opportunity. Because his foundation had been tempered thousands of times, as long as there was enough spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he could condense a true golden core. In the past, the heavenly gate would always open with the spiritual energy tide. Everyone wanted to ascend to the great world through the heavenly gate, so they didn't realize at all. Even if they didn't pass through the heavenly gate, they could use this opportunity to break through to the heavenly man realm. Therefore, with Jiang Jingqing as an example, everyone carefully flew into the center of the whirlpool. If the spiritual energy tide was compared to a cake, then Qin Shi used brute force to smash the cake into mud with one slap. Chapter 375. Under Jiang Jingqing's lead, the Jiang clan's celestials plunged into the world-shaking waterspout. After that, the 300+ celestials began to resist the power of the whirlpool while crazily absorbing the spiritual energy within it. Their bodies were like the earth in the desert. Due to the lack of water, they had already cracked and collapsed. After the heaven and earth spirit chi surged like a flood, their bodies seemed to have turned from cracked earth into fertile fields. The rain nourished the earth, causing the long dried-up desert to once again grow green sprouts. Everyone experienced a feeling that they had never felt before from this. Carefree. It was truly carefree. The rich and pure spiritual chi of heaven and earth was like a bottle of iced cola. The instant they drank it, they could clearly feel An incomparably cool feeling continuously entered their throat, then passed through their internal organs, the major acupoints all over their body, and finally reached their limbs, bones, and the ends of their bodies. But regrettably, the tide of spiritual energy was not very strong to begin with. Thus, after the 300+ celestials crazily devoured it like maggots, the waterspout shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. About half an hour later, the originally incomparably thick waterspout turned into a thin line of water. Then it suddenly stopped rotating. Like a water ball that had been punctured, it collapsed in midair with a loud bang. Seawater continued to sprinkle down from the sky. The spiritual energy that had lost its restraints surged in all directions. Waves came one after another. In just a short while, everything had returned to normal. Just like that. It's over? Jiang Yuankui sat cross-legged in midair. Even after the stormy waves had completely calmed down, he still had a feeling of endless aftertaste. One could not blame him for losing his composure. After all, this feeling was truly too refreshing. Too many people came today. There's not enough to share. Alright, that's it then. Go back and properly enter seclusion for a while. Carefully savor the subtleties of this. You should be able to break through to Celestial very soon. Seeing that everyone seemed to want to continue, Jiang Jingqing, who had experienced it before, couldn't help but laugh proudly. After laughing for a while, Jiang Jingqing suddenly realized a problem. Perhaps the old ancestor had already anticipated the crux of the matter. That was why he made such a big show of making an enemy out of Tiandu. The tidal wave had already receded. The Jiang clan's heavenly clansmen stood up and prepared to return to Daiyu Island. Everyone seemed to be too preoccupied with the feeling just now, so even Jiang Jingqing didn't notice it. Not long after they left, a figure suddenly rose from the sea. This was a young man in his early 20s. He was wearing an extremely retro white robe, and his hair was tied up in a bun. Coupled with the aloof temperament that he inadvertently exuded, this young man simply looked like a talented scholar who had walked out of an ancient painting. But the slightly strange thing was, this person clearly came out of the sea, but there was not a single drop of water on his body. Furthermore, he didn't even make any movements of stepping on the water. His body just floated straight up to the surface of the sea. When more than half of his body was out of the water, the young man walked out of the water step by step as if he was climbing a flight of stairs. Then he stood 2 to 3 meters above the water. Master, oh master, could it be that you've even calculated this step? That's why you let me stay in the lower realm alone? But if you leave, your disciple will feel terrible. Yuhuan Qianzuan is really something. It wasn't easy for me to find a voice transmission talisman in the Misty Pavilion. As soon as I opened it, I didn't even have time to tell you that I'm safe. He ordered me to teach that person a lesson. He even said that it was for the sake of Tiandu's reputation. That's easy for him to say. Even senior brother Baihong wasn't a match for that person. How would I dare to provoke him? Alright, I know even if you don't say it, I can't go against the orders of the Heavenly Venerable. On this vast and boundless sea, apart from the constantly rising waves, there was probably only blue sky and white clouds left. It was obviously so lonely that even a bird could not be seen, but this young man was still looking up as if he was talking to someone. Although you can't hear it, but I still want to say, Yuhuan Qianzuan, oh Yuhuan Qianzuan, Wushu's abilities are weak. I really can't provoke that person, so I can only trouble you to come down and deal with him personally. As he spoke, the young man looked in the direction that Jiang Jingqing and the rest left. Then, as if taking a stroll in the park, he slowly walked in that direction. There's an old saying, pick the soft persimmons to pinch. Apart from waving flags and shouting battle cries, I seem to be able to help you get rid of these eyesores? Forget it, no matter how small a mosquito is, it's still meat. So that you won't find another reason to say that I'm disobedient and disrespectful. The young man's speed seemed slow, but in fact it was extremely fast. Even though Jiang Jingqing and the rest flew at full speed, they never left the young man's line of sight. And the scariest thing was, Jiang Jingqing and the rest were tailed, but among the 300 people, not a single one noticed this mysterious young man. They soon arrived at Daiyu Island. After Jiang Jingqing and the rest entered the formation, they disappeared into thin air. At this moment, the young man looked at the vast ocean in front of him and couldn't help but mumble, "Is this the Big Dipper formation passed down from ancient times? No wonder I couldn't find the right place." As he spoke, the young man walked to the edge of the formation. Without seeing him do anything, a golden light screen appeared out of thin air. The young man stood outside the light screen and stretched his neck to look inside. Then he walked in with a smile on his face. Then, Daiyu Island, which was like a paradise, was completely revealed in front of him. The young man had just arrived, so he couldn't find his way. He couldn't tell which island was the main one. Therefore he went to the nearest island and strolled along the beach. After walking for a while, a group of children playing on the beach noticed him. The leader was a 17 or 18-year-old boy. The boy was quite alert. When he saw the young man's strange clothes, he frowned and called out to him. "Stop. Who are you?" Hearing that, the young man immediately stopped in his tracks. He first looked at the group of children in front of him, then smiled and replied, "Me? I'm Wuxia. You wouldn't know me even if I told you, so I think I might as well not tell you." "You're an outsider?" The boy looked at him in shock. Not long ago there was a muddled incident where an outsider suddenly climbed Wuxia Peak. Therefore, Daiyu Island was under martial law recently. Therefore, when the boy came back to his senses, he immediately turned to his companion and said, "Little Six, go to the guard hall and tell them we found an outsider." "Tell them to." The boy didn't finish his sentence. Because the young man suddenly attacked. He just waved his sleeve casually, and a huge force sent more than 10 children flying. After flying for more than 10 meters, the children fell heavily into the sea. No one knew if they were dead or alive. Note: Chapter 376. Even though he was facing a group of half-grown children, the man who called himself Wuxia still attacked them. He did not seem to think that there was anything wrong with what he did. After sending the children flying into the sea, he even looked at the sea with disdain and muttered, "How rude." After that, he continued walking toward the depths of the island without looking back. As he went deeper into the island, he encountered more and more Jiang clan members along the way. However, regardless of whether they were male or female, old or young, Wuxia would raise his sleeve and send them flying with a slap. The only thing worth rejoicing about was, judging from the state of these people after they fell, Wuxia did not seem to have killed them. He only knocked them out. He did not walk very fast, but he walked straight toward the depths of the island. Therefore he soon arrived at the square in the center of the island. This island was only one of the 17 sub-islands of Daiyu Island. The people on this island were also from the branch clan. Finally, after Wuxia failed to knock everyone out with a slap, his actions had completely alarmed the entire Daiyu Island. The sudden sound of the enemy attack bell was like a muffled thunder that exploded in the sky above Daiyu Island. Bam! 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 Jiang Jingqing and the others had just returned to Wuxia Peak. At this moment, they were gathered together to discuss their experiences. After hearing the sound of the bell, one of the heavenly beings immediately stood up and said with a frown, "The forbidden bell of Xiushan Island has rung. I'll go back and take a look first." After saying that, the ancestor of the branch clan, Jiang Diheo, rushed out of the ancestral hall and flew toward Xiushan Island. After he left, Jiang Yuankue looked at the others with a puzzled expression and asked, "Mr. Qin has already reached an agreement with the ancestor. I don't think he'll be an enemy of the Jiang clan anymore. But other than him, who else in the world would dare to cause trouble on Daiyu Island now?" Jiang Yuankue slowly scanned the entire place. However, everyone seemed to still be reminiscing about the spirit tide just now. Therefore many of them even had faint smiles on their faces. However, they could not be blamed for being arrogant. After all, this was the most powerful time in the past 1,000 years for the Jiang clan. More than 300 celestials. The last time Qinshi came to cause trouble, everyone was still in seclusion on Heron Island, so even Qinshi had not truly seen the Jiang clan's foundation. Now that everyone had just returned from the spirit chi tide, all the celestials were gathered at Serene Afterglow Peak, but there were still some ignorant fellows who dared to jump out and cause trouble. Isn't this the same as hanging an old man? Is he tired of living? Therefore, when Jiang Diheo got up and went to Xiushan Island, the others completely forgot about this matter and continued to talk about the topic of cultivation in 2s and 3s. Because in everyone's mind, Jiang Diheo alone was enough to suppress all the unbridled troublemakers. Xiushan Island was only a few kilometers away from the main island. Jiang Diheo soon arrived above Xiushan Island and saw the troublemaker. But that person didn't have any intention of hiding at all. He just stood in the middle of the square and slightly raised his head to look at him. Seeing this, Jiang Diheo immediately flew into a rage and scolded sternly, "Which child dares to cause trouble on my Daiyu Island? Why aren't you surrendering now? Perhaps this old man can still spare your life." After saying that, Jiang Diheo flew directly toward that person, ready to take him down and slowly interrogate him. At this time, Wuxia, who had been standing in the middle of the square in a daze, finally seemed to have seen something interesting. He couldn't help but mutter to himself, "I've been holding back for so long and now I can finally move my muscles and bones." While muttering, Wuxia raised his right hand. Then, a small yellow flag suddenly appeared in his hand. If one ignored the workmanship of the flag and the exquisite and complicated patterns on the flag, he really looked like a member of an elderly tour group, which was simply too low. Jiang Dihao didn't know why Wuxia suddenly had a small flag in his hand, and he only thought that this young man was playing a trick. That was because he didn't know that there was actually a magic treasure in this world, called Sumeru mustard bag. Born like a mustard seed, there's a Sumeru, and the heart like a speck of dust, there's a big world inside. The Sumeru mustard bag, also known as the interspatial storage bag, was a magic treasure that could only be refined by cultivators at the Dongshu stage. This magic treasure involved the profound meaning of the word void. It seemed to be only the size of a palm, but in reality, it could contain objects ranging from a few cubic meters to dozens of cubic meters. It was really a magical treasure that was necessary for traveling, killing, and arson. Qin Shi used to have one, but unfortunately he accidentally lost it on his way back. If Qin Shi was here right now and saw the treasure in this person's hands with her own eyes, even if he was as powerful as he was, he would no longer underestimate his opponent. Instead, he would use 120% of his strength to fight the next battle. This was a very simple principle. One could roughly judge a person's worth from the way they traveled, and it was the same for cultivators. Only cultivators at the Dongshu stage could refine the Sumeru mustard bag, and the materials needed were very rare. Naturally, it couldn't be something that could be found on the streets. Baihong didn't have it, and neither did Shui Xiang. However, this young man named Wuxia had it. This also meant that, no matter what his cultivation was, his status in the outside world was higher than Baihong's. Qin Shi understood this principle, but Jiang Dihao didn't. Therefore, the moment he rushed towards Wuxia, Wuxia also waved the small yellow flag in his hand. At that moment, Jiang Dihao didn't sense any fluctuation of spiritual energy, so he was even a little curious about what this young man was doing. However, the next second, the whole ground cracked open. The floor of the square collapsed and shattered, and hundreds of earth spikes suddenly protruded from the ground. From afar, it looked like a hedgehog, and all the spikes on its body were aimed at Jiang Dihao in the air. Jiang Dihao didn't have time to react at all, and these hundreds of earth spikes all shot towards him. The speed of the earth spikes was very strange. Once they shot out, they covered the sky above the square. No! After a wail, Jiang Dihao's figure completely disappeared. The earth spikes turned into dust and leisurely sprinkled down, mixed with a particularly dazzling rain of blood. After the smoke and dust dispersed, this terrifying young man held the small flag, and then laughed and said to the Jiang clansmen who rang the forbidden bell, "Ring it again, remember to ring it a little louder, or else I'm afraid they won't hear it." From beginning to end, his body didn't move at all. He just lightly waved the small flag in his hand, and with the power of the small flag, he instantly obliterated a celestial being. It was obvious that this small flag was also a magic treasure. But it was different from Baihong's flowing cloud sword and Shui Xiang's blue wave silk gauze. The small flag in Wuxia's hand had once appeared in the legends of Wuxia, and it had a well-known name, namely Chapter 377. The Central Wuji Apricot Flag. If one added the Eastern Green Lotus Flag, the Southern Floating Flame Flag, the Western White Cloud Boundary Flag, and the Northern Jinwu Eagle Flag. These 5 flags formed a set of killing weapons that had once appeared in the myths and legends of Wuxia, the Khanate 5-element flags. Ever since Qin Shi learned about the deeds of the ancient cultivators from the old man, he had a basic understanding of these myths and legends, and that was, these myths and legends were more or less based on evidence, so their reputation had been passed down from ancient times until now. Of course, the real Khanate 5-element flags was definitely not as exaggerated as the myths and legends described, but it was definitely considered an extremely powerful set of Dharma treasures. In addition, the Khanate 5-element flags was truly praiseworthy not because of its quality, but because it was a set. Because it was a set of Dharma treasures, not one. The Wuji Apricot flag was only one of them. It could be freely disassembled and combined. This was the advantage of a set of Dharma treasures, but at the same time, it was also an unavoidable disadvantage of a set of Dharma treasures. Based on Qin Shi's experience, after gathering all 5 flags, the Khanate 5-element flags could at least reach the quality of a supreme treasure, which was the same level as his Heaven Derivation Sword. But because it was not pure enough, the Khanate 5-element flags could never be compared to the Heaven Derivation Sword. But then again, a supreme treasure was still a supreme treasure. Even if the 5 flags were disassembled, just the central Wuji apricot flag alone should be able to reach the level of a high-grade spirit treasure. What was a spirit treasure? Above a Dharma treasure was a spirit treasure. When Qinshi had just returned, he had used 3 inferior Guanyin statues to refine 3 defensive Dharma treasures. But in a real sense, these 3 Guanyin pendants did not reach the standard of a Dharma treasure at all. At best, they could only be considered the lowest level of inferior Dharma artifacts. After all, at that time, Qinshi had no cultivation and no materials, so the Guanyin pendants that he forcibly refined would naturally not be good treasures. Dharma artifacts, Dharma treasures, spirit treasures, supreme treasures, and extremely rare Khanate supreme treasures. According to their quality, they could be divided into 9 grades. Grade 1 was the lowest and grade 9 was the highest. The reason why he didn't mention magic treasures before was because it was impossible to find the materials to refine magical weapons on Earth. Refining magical weapons was an extremely difficult task, not to mention magical weapons with many wonderful uses. Bai Hong's sword, Qing Wan's spear, and Shui Xiang's damask could all be considered as high-quality magic treasures. Bai Hong's sword was quite handy, so Qinshi did not destroy it. Therefore, he chose to smelt Qing Wan's spear and used the smelted materials to refine a set of defensive magic equipment. In addition to Nianyan's bracelet necklace, Qinshi later gave Lin Xian a self-defense pendant. Of course, heavenly materials and earthly treasures were all unique. Therefore, after smelting the magic treasure and then using the raw materials to refine a new magic treasure, if new materials were not added during this period, then the quality of the new magic treasure would plummet after it was formed. For example, Qing Wan's spear was originally grade 8, but after being smelted by Qinshi, the new necklace could only barely reach grade 5. And this was a manifestation of Qinshi's considerable knowledge in refining weapons. Magic treasures were like weapons in the hands of ordinary people. The better the weapon, the stronger the combat power. Even if a child picked up an AK, he could easily kill a group of unarmed adults. It was precisely because of this. From the moment Wushu took out the central Wuji apricot yellow flag, Daiyu Island was destined to be set off a bloody storm. Dong dong dong, dong. The rapid and loud forbidden bell rang through the sky again. This time, all the Jiang clan's people sitting in the ancestral hall were stunned. Jiang Dihao could not even handle such a small matter? Just now, the bell had only rung 9 times, which meant that someone had invaded and reinforcements were needed. But now, the bell rang like a storm and it had rung a total of 36 times. This meant that the situation had deteriorated to the point where it was out of control, and the entire clan urgently needed to face it together. Let's go and take a look. This time, before Jiang Yuankui could say anything, Jiang Jingqing could not sit still anymore. After all, no matter what, he was still a member of the Jiang clan. No matter how much a family quarreled behind closed doors, they were still a family. Now that the Jiang clan was being trampled on, how could Jiang Jingqing sit still and do nothing? After Jiang Jingqing rushed out of the ancestral hall, the rest of the people reacted and quickly followed behind him, flying straight toward Xiushan Island. The Celestials were on patrol, hunting everywhere. Many of the Jiang clan's juniors were more or less trembling when they heard the forbidden bell ringing one after another. They were afraid that the enemy would suddenly appear in front of them. Thus, when they saw hundreds of their ancestors flying over the island, they immediately stood on the ground and cheered crazily as if they had been injected with chicken blood. This scene deeply demonstrated the meaning of the military parade. A clan or even a country would only feel excited and proud when they displayed their strength in front of the people. The dignity of Daiyu Island, it would not allow anyone to trample on it. Jiang Jingqing's speed was very fast, and he almost instantly arrived above Xiushan Island. The young man was still standing in the same place looking up at the sky. Only Jiang Dihao was nowhere to be seen. But how sharp was Jiang Jingqing's sense of smell? When he sensed that there was still a trace of blood in the air, Jiang Jingqing was about to explode in anger. Obviously, Jiang Dihao had died in the hands of this person, so the 36 forbidden bells were rung on Xiushan Island. Tsk. Arrogant brat, die. Unlike the last time when he fought with Chen Shi, Jiang Jingqing underestimated his opponent and did not even have the chance to show half of his strength before he was smashed into the ground by Chen Shi. This time, in a fit of rage, Jiang Jingqing really showed his full strength. Therefore, when he let out a furious roar, the clothes on his body suddenly puffed up without any wind. His head of black hair also swayed crazily, as if he was in the eye of the storm. Surging true core energy gathered in his palms, and Jiang Jingqing's hands suddenly became like 2 searchlights, exceptionally bright. Then he slapped his palm toward the young man on the ground from afar. True 6 trigrams formula, mountain breaking all. A ray of golden energy suddenly shot out from his palm, as if it was the Buddha's palm. At this moment, Wuxia, who had been standing on the ground, looked as if he had seen something new. He squinted his eyes slightly, and then waved the yellow flag in his hand. When the yellow flag was waved, the ground shook. 2 extremely thick mud pillars suddenly emerged from the ground, and then turned into 2 extremely thick arms. From bottom to top, they directly rushed toward Jiang Jingqing in the sky. Jiang Jingqing did not expect this young man's cultivation level to be so high. The mountain breaking all that he had used all his strength only shattered a corner of the mud pillars, and did not even slow down the opponent's attack. The 2 mud pillars were like the arms of a giant, hard and flexible at the same time. Chapter 378. It was hard to describe what it was like. It was just a pile of soil mixed with sand and stones, but it was like a living creature that could move freely and pounce on its prey. Jiang Jingqing was obviously playing the role of the prey. The mud pillars emerged from the ground and shot into the sky like poisonous snakes pouncing on their prey. They were incredibly fast. The strength of the mud pillars surprised Jiang Jingqing. While he was in a daze, the mud pillars had already reached him. After Jiang Jingqing reacted, he immediately retreated into the sky. But the scary thing was, the speed at which the 2 mud pillars rose was even faster than his flying speed. In a flash, the mud pillars had caught up with Jiang Jingqing. After all, this was already the 2nd time he had been chased to the point of fleeing in such a sorry state. Jiang Jingqing could not help but feel angry when he thought of all the things that had happened to him after his breakthrough. He was a heavenly being after all. It was fine when he faced Mr. Chen's flying immortal sword. But now he was being chased all over the sky by 2 mud pillars. Did they really think that he was a heavenly being and a paper tiger? Jiang Jingqing decided not to dodge anymore. He was ready to take the attack head-on. In an instant, Jiang Jingqing was like a god descending to earth. The golden light around him shone brightly, almost illuminating half of Xiushan Island. 6 trigram calming mind, concealment of spirit and qi. The moment the protective shield appeared, 2 mud pillars, one on the left and one on the right, smashed into Jiang Jingqing's body. Bang! A loud noise reverberated in the sky above Diyu Island. The surging true core dispersed in all directions due to the violent collision, causing a strong gust of wind to blow across Xiushan Island. Wuxia stood calmly on the ground and looked up at the situation from afar. He could not help but smile faintly. They were too weak. He did not even need to do anything. The power of the Wuxia apricot yellow flag alone was enough to massacre the entire Diyu Island. Wuxia thought about whether he should speed up as he turned to look at the heavenly beings of the Jiang clan. But just as he was about to wave the apricot yellow flag again, Jiang Jingqing's slightly hurried roar suddenly rang out. This kid's Dharma treasure is too powerful. Retreat, retreat, retreat. It wasn't difficult to discern that his voice clearly carried a trace of shock and terror. Obviously, he was terrified by the might of the Wuxia apricot yellow flag. Jiang Jingqing had quite a bit of prestige in the clan. After hearing his incessantly trembling shout, the Jiang clan's celestials naturally did not dare to rashly advance. They could only hurriedly retreat several miles. At this time, Jiang Jingqing turned into a stream of light and flew out of the square, rushing back to the crowd. If it wasn't for the ancestor bestowing me with a protective magic treasure a few days ago, I'm afraid I would have been dead by now. After Jiang Jingqing safely returned to Jiang Yuankue's side, he panted heavily and said to Jiang Yuankue. As he spoke, Jiang Jingqing even passed a jade pendant to Jiang Yuankue. This jade pendant was a protective magic treasure passed down from ancient times. If Jiang Yen hadn't been the first to break through to the celestial being realm, the old ancestor Jiang Yen wouldn't have given him this jade pendant. But now, he hadn't even warmed up the jade pendant when 4 or 5 extremely clear cracks appeared on it. Clearly, it was on the verge of breaking apart. The might of a single attack was actually so terrifying. At this time, if Jiang Yuankue still didn't understand the seriousness of the matter, then he would truly be the clan chief for nothing. Therefore, after exchanging a glance with Jiang Jingqing, Jiang Yuankue abruptly raised his right hand and shouted, "The enemy is here. Everyone please form the yin-yang 6 directions formation with me." After saying that, the Jiang clan's celestials immediately formed groups of 6 and surrounded Xiushan Island square in all directions. Over 300 celestials. How magnificent of a scene would that be? But Wuxia acted as if he was watching a monkey show. Even though he was surrounded, there was still a faint smile on his face. When the golden light of the serene afterglow peak soared into the clouds and the heavenly stars formation was completely activated, Wushu slowly flew into the air under the gazes of the crowd. At this moment the entire crowd was silent. Jiang Yu and Kuei did not say anything. While everyone was waiting in formation, they were also silently examining the mysterious young man in front of them. Finally, Wushu was the first to speak, breaking the silence. I am the Divine General of Tiandu Wushu. Under the orders of Yuhuan Tianzuan, I have specially come to condemn you all. No one answered him. Because when they heard the two words Tiandu, all kinds of complicated expressions appeared on their faces. Wushu was not in a hurry to continue speaking. He only slowly swept his gaze over the crowd. But those who were swept by his gaze involuntarily lowered their heads, not daring to look at him. At this moment, Wushu was simply like Kangxi in disguise. When he announced his name, everyone was stunned by his identity. Tiandu. For the Jiang clan's clansmen, that was a distant place, a place that they yearned for day and night. But now, under the lead of their ancestor, they took the initiative to go against Tiandu. Wasn't this a rebellion? You are merely descendants of sinners, but the divine ancestor thought of the bitter cold of the lower realm, so he spared you all and allowed you to ascend to the upper realm. In the blink of an eye, the divine ancestor has already passed away. You all do not know how to cherish the divine ancestor's kindness. Instead, you all think of ways to destroy the foundations of the divine ancestor and prevent the divine ancestor from opening. This crime is unforgivable. When Wushu was alone, he would always talk nonsense like a crazy person. That was why their teacher always said that he would not grow up and was far from Baihang. But when he was serious, his body would erupt with a powerful aura that was enough to suffocate people. He just silently floated in the air. Every word he said was like a heavy hammer, smashing into everyone's chest. Everyone lowered their heads in silence. They were all waiting for their ancestor to speak, but for some reason their ancestor did not do anything today. Only Jiang Jingqing, after taking a deep look at the jade pendant in his hand, he spat at Wu Su angrily. Then he scolded sternly, "Bah, arrogant brat. After calling us sinners every time you open your mouth, dare I ask what our Jiang clan has done wrong?" Hearing this, Wushu chuckled. Just as he was about to reply, Jiang Jingqing continued, "Don't talk to me about the upper and lower realms. I have seen all the changes in the world. In the past, when Tiandu was strong, the Jiang clan could only become sinners and be trapped in this bitter cold. Didn't you all look down on the lower realm? Why are you here today? I think you know that too. Things are different now. Jinling's jade tree is famous, Qinhuai's waterside pavilion blooms early, but who knew that it would disappear so easily? I saw him build a vermilion tower, I saw him host guests, and I saw him collapse. I think you all are grasshoppers after autumn. You won't be able to jump around for long." Hearing this, the smile on Wu Su's face disappeared. After coldly looking at Jiang Jingqing, Wu Shu raised the apricot yellow flag in his hand again. Seeing this, the Jiang clan immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. As long as Jiang Yu and Kuei gave the order, they would attack at the same time. They had to kill him instantly. Don't tell me you all really think that destroying the five-directional holy palace and extracting the spiritual energy foundation can stop the gate of heaven from opening? That's wishful thinking. How foolish. Today I will say this. Because of what you all have done today, when the gate of heaven reopens, it will be the time when this world will be plunged into misery and suffering. When autumn comes on the 8th day of the 9th month, all flowers will be killed. Chapter 379. Shushan Island was in a mess. 300 celestial beings stood in formation. Everyone stared at the young man in the sky above the square from afar. Divine General. After hearing his last sentence, Jiang Jingqing knew that he couldn't let him continue. There was no point in saying more. If a random Divine General was enough to make everyone cower in fear, wouldn't the Jiang clan go for wool and come home shorn? Therefore Jiang Jingqing hesitated for a while. Then a fierce look flashed across his face. He walked past Jiang Yu and Kuei and ordered everyone, "Formation." In that instant, the mountains rumbled, the valleys responded, and the wind blew. Dust swirled and flags fluttered. How magnificent was the sight of 300 celestial beings. No matter how arrogant Wushu was, facing such a large number of enemies, he had to be on full alert. For the first time, his body showed signs of true yuan fluctuation. Attack. Jiang Jingqing didn't give Wushu too much time to prepare. After giving the order, he ordered everyone to attack with all their might. The surging Jin Yuan gushed toward Wuxia like a torrential flood. Seeing this, Wuxia did not have any intention of running away. Because at this moment, he was the divine general of Tiandu. He represented Tiandu to punish the sinners. If he ran away, where would Tiandu's face be? He could not back down from this battle. Come on, let me take a look. What gave you the courage to go against Tiandu? Wuxia was so angry that his hair and beard fluttered. He roared into the sky. The yellow flag in his hand was like a balloon. It expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, he quickly took out a pill from his Sumeru mustard seed bag and stuffed it into his mouth. Shenyang snow-melting pill. This pill was a 9th-grade spirit pill. Its effect was that when a cultivator burned their essence blood, the effect of the essence blood would be greatly enhanced. This would allow the cultivator to explode with power far greater than before. The 9th-grade Central Wuji apricot yellow flag in one hand and the 9th-grade Shenyang snow-melting pill in the other. Wuxia's combat power was not inferior to Qin Shi's. Therefore, just as the Jiang clan's attack was about to arrive, the yellow flag in Wuxia's hand exploded with a dazzling yellow light. The light was so bright that it almost dyed the entire sky. The 5 direction flags, Earth is supreme. Heaven Empress Earth, Heaven Empress, Heaven pure will not fail. With a wave of the flag, the entire Earth trembled. Countless mud pillars suddenly extended from the ground and turned into a huge mud wall, surrounding Wuxia. The attacks of the Jiang clan's celestials all landed on the earth wall. Boom, 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 boom. Dust flew everywhere and sand and gravel flew everywhere. Huge explosions sounded in the sky above Xiushan Island one after another. That scene, it was like an air raid during World War II. The rumbling did not stop for even a moment. In truth, Jiang Jingqing was well aware that the other party's strength far surpassed his own. Therefore, if they did not make use of their numerical advantage, they would have no hope at all. Therefore, after the first round of attacks, Jiang Jingqing didn't wait for everyone to catch their breath before he roared fiercely, "Don't stop! Beat him up! Even if we have to destroy Xiushan Island today, we must bury this bastard here. Jiang family, prosper without decline." At this moment, the ancestral 6-trigram incantation of the Jiang clan could be considered to have completely bloomed. They were the origin of the necromancers and also the masters of the Tao of sorcery. Therefore, all kinds of 5-elemental sorcery were like a storm, smashing towards the center of the square. One round after another, as if there would never be a day of rest. Finally, some people had to stop temporarily because they had used up too much energy. However, they stopped in the air and gasped for breath. Because Jiang Jingqing was a level higher than everyone else, when everyone had no choice but to stop, he was still crazily attacking the center of the square. The dust raised by the explosions blocked everyone's sight. From afar, the entire sky above Xiushan Island was filled with a layer of dust, as if a sandstorm was coming. Second granduncle, stop. Seeing Jiang Jingqing continuously attacking like a madman, Jiang Yuankue quickly reached out to stop him. Although Jiang Yuankue did not want to believe that this person would be so stupid as to stand in the center and let them attack as they wished. But the truth was right in front of him. There were no signs of true essence fluctuations in the air above the square. However, out of caution, Jiang Yuankue did not immediately go forward to check the situation. Instead, he continued to wait patiently outside. Under Jiang Yuankue's persuasion, Jiang Jingqing finally stopped. However, after he took 2 deep breaths, he frowned and said with a serious face, "Yuge, I think something is wrong," as expected. Before Jiang Jingqing finished speaking, a burst of bright light suddenly exploded in the center of the square. Immediately after, Wuxia's voice was heard again. "You guys, is that all you've got?" Suddenly, a gust of wind came from nowhere. After the smoke dissipated, Wuxia's figure appeared in front of everyone's eyes again. "Could it be that you guys have been in the lower realm for too long, so you don't even know how to fight? If that's the case, why don't you just bind yourselves and ask me to be lenient?" If Wuxia was a fully armed modern special force, then the Jiang family was simply a primitive warrior who only knew how to rely on brute force to fight. After all, it was because the earth had been desolate for too long that civilization had degenerated to a primitive society. Spells, pills, talismans, refining weapons, setting up formations and poison. Other than the spell inheritance that had not been cut off, what was left of the Jiang family? It could be said that this was a war between a modern civilization and a primitive society. In fact, the Wuji apricot yellow flag was not a killing magic treasure at all. Instead, it was mainly used for defense like Shuixiang's silk satin. Therefore, when the Jiang family attacked, Wushu only needed to hide under the protection of the Wuji apricot yellow flag. If the enemy advances, I will retreat. If the enemy stays, I will disturb. If the enemy is tired, I will attack. If the enemy retreats, I will chase. The 16 words formula for guerrilla warfare, even in the immortal cultivation world, was an absolutely correct tactic. Unfortunately, there was no one in the entire Jiang family who knew about magic treasures, so everyone could only waste their energy. Therefore, it was time for Wushu to show his power. He waved the Wuji apricot yellow flag in his hand, and 4 giant natives made of mud suddenly emerged from the ground, then attacked the Jiang family members in all directions. With the natives holding back, Wushu completely transformed into a war god, holding the apricot yellow flag and rushing towards Jiang Jingqing's direction. To catch bandits, first catch the leader. Seeing Wushu's aggressive momentum, Jiang Jingqing and Jiang Yuankue could not help but be shocked. Even if they were at their peak, they would not be able to fight against Wushu. Now that they had lost more than half of their strength, how would they dare to fight Wushu head-on? Without even needing to communicate, the two flew in different directions, preparing to temporarily avoid the attack. Seeing this, Wushu could not help but laugh. Run? Where do you run to? As his voice fell, Wushu waved the apricot yellow flag in his hand, and directly sent out 2 waves of true origin towards the back of the two. Just at this critical juncture, a wave of true origin suddenly shot out from the forest below like a sharp arrow, and directly shot towards Wushu in the sky. Jiang Jingqing felt something strange behind him. Looking back, he just happened to see that wave of true origin pass through Wushu's body, and drew a thin line of blood in the air. Jiang Jingqing widened his eyes and only felt that his mind was blank. Chapter 380. The Old Ancestor Came? Once those words were said, everyone seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. A trace of indescribable excitement immediately appeared on their faces. After all, the old ancestor Jiang Yan was the current spiritual totem of the Jiang clan. Now that the Jiang clan raised the flag and wanted to become enemies with Tiandu, everyone was fighting fiercely. Only the old ancestor was nowhere to be seen, so it was inevitable that everyone would have doubts in their hearts. They could clearly choose to ascend to the higher realms, so why did they have to go against Tiandu? What was the reason? In reality, everyone knew very well why the old ancestor did this. But as long as the old ancestor did not appear, this question would always linger like a nightmare, forever shrouding everyone's heart. The most frightening thing in a battle was to lose morale. Luckily, the old ancestor finally appeared. The spiritual totem was erected again, and everyone's heart was filled with an extremely strong fighting spirit, causing the slightly dispirited morale to instantly soar to the peak. The majestic Jiang clan, flourishing without decline. The giant natives summoned by Wushu had no life to begin with, and each one of them had to face the encirclement of dozens of celestials. Thus, under the continuous encirclement of everyone, the natives could only collapse one by one, turning into a pile of rubble and mud that fell to the ground again. Then, the celestials of the Jiang clan who had freed up their hands immediately turned towards Wushu's direction, firmly surrounding him in the center. Back to Wushu's side. As one of the best 1,000-year-old Go in Qin Shi's heart, Jiang Yan was indeed very patient. He already knew everything that happened on the island, but he still did not immediately stand out to lead everyone to besiege Wushu. Instead, he allowed everyone to suffer a huge loss at Wushu's hands. He was Go and also waiting. Just waiting for the moment Wushu let down his guard, and then launching a fatal attack. For a smart person, 10,000 meaningless attacks were clearly not as effective as a single fatal attack. Just in terms of cultivation, Jiang Yan, who had lived for over 1,000 years, was clearly stronger than Wushu. Thus, when he steeled his heart to launch a sneak attack, even with the protection of the Wuji apricot yellow flag, Wushu was still unable to completely dodge the attack. But fortunately, Wushu reacted very quickly. Furthermore, his clothes were defensive magic treasures. Therefore, the killing move that Jiang Yan had been holding back for a long time only managed to cut off a piece of flesh from his waist. Immortal cultivators did have the ability to regenerate broken limbs. But this takes time to recover slowly. It is impossible to be like Wolverine and Deadpool, whose bodies were clearly chopped into minced meat, but it didn't take long for them to return to their original appearance. That was unscientific. For immortal cultivators, the body was merely a vessel, while the soul was the absolute core. However, once they lost the protection of the vessel, their divine soul would gradually weaken until it completely disappeared from the world. Therefore, for high-level immortal cultivators, the physical body was also an extremely important part of them. It was absolutely impossible for them to abandon it easily. This was the first time Wuxia had suffered such a serious injury. Wuxia lowered his head and looked at the wound on his waist. His face was as cold as a poker card. He silently took out a healing pill from his sumaru mustard seed bag and swallowed it. Then he turned his gaze to the forest below. Subsequently, a figure slowly flew into the air under Wuxia's gaze. Jiang Yuankui took a closer look. After seeing the person's appearance, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Fengyan? Why are you here?" Because of the previous act of snatching the Adumbra flower, Jiang Fengyan had been punished by the old ancestor to meditate in the dry pool, so Jiang Yuankui didn't expect to see his son here. However, Jiang Jingqing immediately figured out the reason, so he immediately cupped his hands and saluted. Jingqing greets the old ancestor. After hearing this, Jiang Yuankui was stunned on the spot. At this time he finally reacted, "Jiang Yan Jiang Fengyan." It was only a difference of one word, but their identities were worlds apart. Jiang Fengyan was a direct descendant of the Jiang family, so the only similarity between the two was probably the blood flowing in their bodies. Bloodline possession. It must be a bloodline possession. The old ancestor forcibly took away Jiang Fengyan's body and erased his divine soul at the same time. Yuankui, the Jiang family has reached a critical moment of life and death. This old man has to do this. If I don't do this, not only Fengyan but even you and the tens of thousands of Jiang family members on Daiyu Island will die in the hands of this person. I hope you can figure this out and don't hold a grudge because of this. Jiang Fengyan flew to the side of the two, then said this to Jiang Yuankui through voice transmission. After hearing this, Jiang Yuankui looked up to the sky and screamed in extreme pain. Then, as if he had gone mad, he turned around and flew in the direction of Qixia Peak. Yuankui? Seeing this, Jiang Jingqing stepped forward to stop Jiang Yuankui. However, before he could turn around, Jiang Fengyan directly called out to him. "Jingqing, the enemy is right in front of us, don't be distracted. After this matter, I will explain to him. I only hope that Yuankui can understand my painstaking efforts." Since the old ancestor had said so, Jiang Jingqing naturally couldn't say anything more, so he could only nod and respond, "Yes." The three of them seemed to have said a lot, but in fact they used the secret method of voice transmission. Therefore, from Wuxia's injury to Jiang Fengyan's appearance, only a few breaths had passed. And at this time, Wuxia also used a spiritual pill to stop his injury. Bloodline possession, is it? Come on, then let me see. Old man, other than sneak attacks, what else do you have? If Wuxia was an elegant young master before, then at this moment, he had already become an injured beast. So, after a roar, Wuxia picked up the apricot yellow flag and pounced directly at Jiang Yan. Seeing this, Jiang Yan did not retreat. Instead, he suddenly made hand signs and shouted loudly, "I am Jiang Yan, the ancestor of the illustrious clan, listen to my orders." Following his order, the Jiang clan's celestials present all made hand signs one after another. Jiang Yan was at the core of the formation, and he felt hundreds of huge true essences constantly surging towards him. And the power of the Yin-Yang Six Directions formation was truly displayed after he, the backbone, appeared. Brilliant heavenly might, transform into divine thunder. 6 lines of space, rebuking without arrogance. In an instant, lightning appeared in the void and heavenly thunder rumbled. Jiang Yan held the thunder in his hand, and his eyes were wide open in anger, as if a god had descended. Let me emphasize again. This is not an entertainment stay-at-home dad, nor a restaurant stay-at-home dad. This is returning from cultivation to become a stay-at-home dad. The theme determines that I can't be a daily life, and the main storyline is not changed at all, right? As a dignified soul formation cultivator, isn't it too ridiculous to go to the entertainment industry? I have my own main storyline, my own plot arrangement, but when it was published, because I was too concerned about the reader's comments, I lost myself. Before, I even mistakenly thought that cultivation and stay-at-home dad were conflicting. Until now, only then did I realize what was going on. I'm not money, I can't make everyone like me. I can only do my best to write the story I want to write. If you think it is good, please recommend it to your friends after reading it. If you think it is not good, then please put it aside and find another book you like to read. I only hope that we can meet again in the future. Because this is only my first book and definitely not my last. I have always been working hard to improve myself, hoping that I can write better in the future so that you will be satisfied. Sincerely. In addition, the part about Nyin will not be lost and will instead be written better. Because when I think of the later plot, I feel that I have found the surging passion I had when I first opened the book. Since I am a cultivation stay-at-home dad, then I will bring out the characteristics of a cultivation stay-at-home dad. Don't mention the word stay-at-home dad, everyone will think of the same thing. Chapter 381. Yin and Yang, 5 elements, 6 lines, 8 trigrams. The 5 elements reinforced and restrained each other. The 5 elements did not simply refer to the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It referred to a cultivator's basic understanding of the laws of heaven and earth. Only by understanding the 5 elements, Yin and Yang, could one officially step into the door of immortality. Among the 5 elements, thunder represented the Zhen trigram, which was wood. Even a blind man could see that Wuxia's cultivation method was based on earth. Therefore Jiang Yin did not even need to think too much and directly took out the Jiang clan's trump card, 9 Heavens Thunder Technique. At that moment, Jiang Yin, who held the thunder in his hand, was so powerful that it almost completely suppressed Wuxia's limelight. Seeing this, Wuxia's face suddenly revealed a trace of a sinister smile. Without hesitation he took out another magic treasure from his Sumeru mustard seed bag. White Bone Soul Summoning Banner. Then, with the flag in his right hand and the banner in his left hand, he continued to rush in the direction of Jiang Yin. It had to be mentioned here, there was actually a difference between a banner and a flag. A flag was hung horizontally like a national flag, while a banner was hung vertically. Horizontal as a flag, vertical as a banner. There seemed to be no difference between the two, but in reality there was a big difference. That was because the flag was Yang and the banner was Yin. Therefore, the moment Wuxia took out the White Bone Soul Summoning Banner, a black gas suddenly surged out from his body, as if thousands of vengeful spirits were flowing within. With one hand, the apricot yellow flag was mighty and righteous. With the other, the White Bone Soul Summoning Banner was awe-inspiring. Since Jiang Yin wanted to use the 5 elements to restrain him, then he might as well combine Yin and Yang, and directly surpass the 5 elements. Under the contrast of one good and one evil, one Yin and one Yang. Wuxia was like a combination of gods and demons, brazenly facing the 9 heavens thunder in Jiang Yan's hands. A battle between Yuan Yin and Yang. Thunder against Yin and Yang earth. This battle was so exciting that it could be said to be a once-in-a-lifetime event. However, just as Xiushan Island was collapsing and the sky was darkening, Jiang Jingqing's figure quietly appeared on Qixia Peak. As the Jiang clan's only celestial being, he did not follow the old ancestor to face the great enemy together. Instead he came here to find Jiang Yuankui. As soon as he stepped into the ancestral hall, he saw Jiang Yuankui kneeling in front of the Jiang clan's ancestral tablets with a stupefied expression. It was unknown what he was thinking. Seeing this, Jiang Jingqing couldn't help but fly into a rage. He directly grabbed Jiang Yuankui's collar and lifted him up from the ground. The Jiang clan is currently facing a great calamity. For this reason, the old ancestor did not hesitate to save up for 1,000 years. He possessed Feng Yin just to mediate with that thief for a moment. But you, as the patriarch, are unable to recover from this setback. Could it be that you want to watch as that bastard kills all of my Jiang clan's clansmen in order to resolve the hatred in your heart? For a father, what kind of blow would the pain of losing a child be? Not to mention the ordinary people, even Jiang Yuankui, who was the clan leader, had completely lost his soul under this blow. Therefore, after hearing Jiang Jingqing's reprimand, Jiang Yuankui smiled bitterly and said, "Second granduncle must be joking. Yuankui's strength is low. Even if I go, I can only stand on the side and cheer for old ancestor." Slap. Before Jiang Yuankui could finish his words, Jiang Jingqing slapped him in the face and sent him flying more than 10 meters away. He even slid on the ground for a long time before finally coming to a stop after hitting a pillar. "I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. Let me tell you. The Jiang clan is facing a great calamity. If old ancestor can't defeat that bastard, even if I have to run away before the battle, I will come back and kill you first." Hearing this, Jiang Yuankui lay on the ground without moving. It seemed that his heart was already dead. Seeing him like this, Jiang Jingqing was furious. Just as he was about to go up and hit Jiang Yuankui to wake him up, a series of shocking rumbles suddenly came from outside the house. Like an earthquake, the entire Daiyu Island trembled, and the tiles of the ancestral temple rustled and fell. Obviously, the battle had reached its climax. Since the battle was so fierce, Jiang Jingqing, who was the main force, naturally did not dare to delay for too long. Therefore, he could only stomp his foot hard and leave a sentence before turning around and flying out of the ancestral temple. "Old ancestor asked me to pass on a message to you. If you care about the Jiang clan's tens of thousands of years of foundation, Then stand up and think of a way to find a strong ally for the Jiang clan to solve the current crisis. Jiang Jingqing left. After a long while, Jiang Yuankui crawled up from the ground with some difficulty. Strong ally? Even though Jiang Jingqing did not say who that person was, Jiang Yuankui instantly understood the old ancestor's meaning. However, he did not act immediately. Instead, he stood where he was and seriously thought about it. In fact, Jiang Yuankui had been very clear-headed the whole time. And because he was clear-headed, he had always had a question in his heart. Everything that was happening now, was it all part of the old ancestor's plan? Perhaps the possession of Fengyan was also part of it? This was a very scary guess, and it made Jiang Yuankui shudder. He could not be sure. He could not be sure. That was because, after all, the blood of the Jiang clan still flowed in his body. Jiang Yuankui hesitated for a while with a complicated expression. In the end, he still could not cut off the fetters that originated from the depths of his bloodline. He turned around and walked toward the back of the ancestral temple. From the perspective of communication technology, modern technology had indeed surpassed immortal cultivation techniques. Jiang Yuankui was only a diviner. Therefore, if he wanted to instantly contact Qin Shi on the other side of the world, other than a phone call, Jiang Yuankui really could not think of any other way. Fortunately, Qin Shi had left his phone number before. Otherwise, Jiang Yuankui really would not be able to call the heavens or the earth. When the phone rang, Qin Shi was busy in the courtyard counting the medicinal ingredients. He was preparing to officially start refining medicine at night after Nian Yan fell asleep. Hello? Who is this? Mr. Qin, it's me, Jiang Yuankui. As soon as the call connected, Jiang Yuankui's slightly hoarse voice sounded from the other end of the phone. Hearing this, Qin Shi immediately raised his eyebrows. After glancing at the Adumbra flower, he prepared to smile and say a few words of courtesy to Jiang Yuankui. However, before he could speak, Jiang Yuankui anxiously said, "The Jiang clan is in danger. Sir, please lend us a hand." Then Jiang Yuankui quickly recounted the situation on Daiyu Island. After hearing this, Qin Shi's face showed a hint of surprise. If they did not use an atomic bomb, even if the entire Wulian came out, they would not be able to do anything to the Jiang clan. He had already killed one heavenly general and captured 3 alive. Why was the 5th one so powerful all of a sudden? It was not that Qin Shi looked down on Bai Hong. The main reason was that the old man from the Jiang clan was too cunning. Therefore, Qin Shi did not think that the heavenly general would be able to gain any advantage from the old man. Looking at the situation now, the Jiang clan seemed to be unable to hold on any longer. Was that why they were asking him for help? Alright, you guys hold on. I'll be there soon. In any case, he had taken something good from them. Naturally, Qin Shi could not leave them in the lurch. Therefore, he agreed to Jiang Yuankui's request. He wanted to take this opportunity to see for himself. Chapter 382. After explaining the situation to Qin Ruoying, Qin Shi set off for Daiyu Island. As soon as he got close to the waters around Daiyu Island, the sky suddenly darkened. Thunder and lightning intertwined and torrential rain poured down. Thick fog rolled and rose from the surface of the sea, and the sea looked as if a tsunami was approaching. The waves surged over one after another, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were screaming, charging, and fighting. From time to time, waves soared into the sky, creating splashes of water that were more than 10 feet high. It was a spectacular sight that could not be described with words. Because the Jiang family had activated the protective array, even Qin Shi could not see what was going on inside. When he forcibly broke open a crack in the array and was about to enter, a surging and violent wave of spirit chi suddenly surged out from the crack. Qin Shi only sensed it briefly, but he frowned on the spot. This was the remnant aura after the great battle. At the same time, there were 2 distinct waves of true origin in this aura. This meant that the battle had reached its climax, and both parties did not even bother to restrain themselves. That was why so much spirit chi had leaked out. Qin Shi could only hope that the old man could hold on for a while longer. After all, he was not here to collect the Jiang family's corpse. Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't help but speed up his movements. With a flash, his entire person directly entered the grand formation. As soon as he entered the array, he saw a field of wildfire, thick smoke, and dilapidated walls. Daiyu Island? Where was the beautiful and spectacular sight that Qin Shi had seen when he first came here? Xiushan Island, which was located at the westernmost tip of Daiyu Island, had half a mountain cut off. Many Jiang family members who were lucky enough to survive could only hold onto broken logs and cry in the sea. The island was shattered and the mountain was flattened. The wildfire lit up the forest and thick smoke filled the sky. The 17 islands of Diyu Island? There were only 1 or 2 that had not been affected by the great battle. It could be said that heaven and earth had lost their color, and all living things were crying out in grief. It was a scene of misery and suffering. Rumble. Rumble. The battle was not over yet. Every time Wuxia and Jiang Yan clashed, the shockwaves produced by the collision of their Zhenyuan would instantly destroy everything around them. Thunder continued to rumble and the earth trembled violently. This scene was very similar to the carpet bombing tactics of World War II. Thus, compared to the Jiang clan's people in the sky, the Jiang clan's people with shallow cultivations below were the ones who were truly living in fear. They would never know when the next wave of attacks would befall them. They watched as their loved ones fell one after another in the aftermath of the great battle, or were directly smashed into meat paste by the dissipating true essence. The pitiful Jiang clansmen could only hug each other and cry bitterly. The Celestials couldn't protect them and the old ancestor couldn't save them. Who else could save them? Blood flowed like a river and corpses piled up into mountains. Tens of thousands of people were in grief, their wails shaking the heavens. Looking at the tragic scenes in front of him, Qin Shi, who was used to living in a civilized society, felt a little uncomfortable for a moment. Although he had only returned for a little over a year, he felt that he had been away from that cruel world for far too long. Until this moment, he finally found the feeling he had back then. The battle between Yuanying was indeed more terrifying than he had imagined. Both of them were experts. Experts naturally didn't need to be compassionate, nor did they need to be overcautious. However, looking at the grief-stricken mortals below, combined with what he had seen and heard during this period of time, Qin Shi couldn't help but have a question in his mind. Strength and weakness were relative. Compared to humans, ants were extremely insignificant. But compared to immortal cultivators, what was the difference between an ordinary person and an ant? At this moment, Qin Shi suddenly had an epiphany and completely forgot where he was. He actually fell into deep thought just like that. Strength was divided into strong and weak. All living things were equal. Even if they were as insignificant as ants, as a life between heaven and earth, they should receive the least amount of respect. In front of humans, ants were insignificant. But in front of planets like Tianshan or Earth, weren't humans also insignificant and insignificant? Any wave of tides was enough to affect all life on this planet. The dinosaurs were extinct. The ancient immortal cultivators were lucky enough to escape. In front of heaven and earth, all living things were equal. Whether it was the ante selling vegetables on the street or him, the divine Lord of Dawn, what was the difference between the two in essence? Cultivation was a kind of detachment. In that case, what level of cultivation did he have to reach before he could be considered an absolute expert? Qin Shi floated quietly in midair. Suddenly, his heart trembled violently. Immediately after, a feeling of enlightenment rushed into Qin Shi's heart. Through the accumulated tribulations of the mystifying scripture, he was enlightened in an instant. Understanding one's heart and seeing one's nature. Enlightenment. He hadn't had this feeling for a long time. Under such circumstances, under such conditions, he could actually have an epiphany? One had to know that epiphany was a very mysterious thing. It had nothing to do with cultivation, but it was extremely important and would be of great help to cultivation. Although he didn't comprehend the true essence of the word void, for Qin Shi this was already a great blessing. He even had a vague feeling that he might not be far from the insightful emptiness realm. Just one more step, as long as he understood the word void, he would be able to step into the insightful emptiness realm. Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't help but be overjoyed. He subconsciously raised his head to the sky and let out a long howl. His voice was full of joy. But this joy was obviously somewhat out of place with the atmosphere on Diyu Island. Wuxia and Jiang Yan's 5 senses were very sharp. Even though they were fighting fiercely, both of them noticed this extremely discordant howl. Mr. Qin? When Jiang Yan saw the figure in the distance clearly, he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. One had to know that Jiang Yan had been reincarnated through possession. After several rounds of fierce fighting, his body was already somewhat overwhelmed and could explode and die at any time. When that time came, who in this huge Jiang clan would be able to stop Wuxia for a moment? Therefore, after seeing Qin Shi's figure, Jiang Yan was suddenly very excited. It had to be said that the 3 words Mr. Qin did indeed have a strange magic power. After Jiang Yan blurted out these 3 words in a moment of excitement, the scene became strangely quiet. The Jiang clan's celestials all looked in the direction their ancestor was pointing. Even Wuxia, he actually stopped fighting temporarily and turned to look in Qin Shi's direction. In an instant, Qin Shi had become the focus of everyone's attention. Seeing this, Qin Shi suddenly came back to his senses and finally remembered why he was here. Sorry I'm late. Chapter 383. This was how Mr. Qin, who was the center of attention, appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. Then he flew to Jiang Jingqing's side. Perhaps it was because he had just had an epiphany, but Qin Shi was in a good mood. He even nodded at Jiang Jingqing. Seeing this, Jiang Jingqing smiled bitterly and shook his head. Mr. Qin was in a good mood. The mood of this group of people was very heavy. Hey, where's your ancestor? Is he okay? After all, Qin Shi owed him a favor. Naturally, he had to express his gratitude. But he looked left and right, but did not see Jiang Yan's figure, which was why he asked this question. I'm here. Mr. Ming, I'm very happy that you're concerned about me. Hearing this, Jiang Yan forced a smile and responded. At this time, Qin Shi finally noticed the young man beside him. If he remembered correctly, this young man was the one who wanted to take the Adumbra flower away from him. Wait a minute, this kid was not even a diviner, right? How did he become so powerful after not seeing him for a few days? Feeling the surge of true origin in Jiang Yan's body, even Qin Shi could not help but be stunned for a moment. Immediately after that, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He could not help but ask tentatively, bloodline possession? You're very knowledgeable, Mr. Meng. Hearing this, Jiang Yan nodded straightforwardly, confirming his guess. The so-called bloodline possession was actually a taboo technique. It went against the rules, so it was not tolerated by the world. A very simple example could be given. If a grandfather took away his grandson's body, how should the father address his son? Should he address his son's body as his father? Or should he address his father's soul as his son? No matter who it was, they would not be able to accept such a strange thing. But even so, bloodline possession was still a common occurrence. After all, compared to outsiders, the possessor and the possessor shared the same bloodline. After possession, it was naturally easier for the possessor to unleash his original strength. Looking at Jiang Fengyan, who had a young face but was extremely mature in his behavior, Jiang Fengyan felt a chill run down his spine. Qin Shi was speechless. However, this was someone else's family matter after all. As an outsider, he had no right to interfere. In fact, Qin Shi had long felt that this old man was very sinister, but he did not expect this old man to be even more sinister than he had imagined. The old man had used the soul crystal to live for thousands of years. Qin Shi thought that he had taken over the body so he could only stay in the soul crystal for the rest of his life. He didn't expect the old man to have such a trick up his sleeve. It wasn't until today that he seized his great-great-great-grandson's body. Jiang Fengyan was a good material. He could be considered to have excellent aptitude. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to take half a step into the Deva realm at such a young age. With such aptitude, if placed in the heavenly jade domain, no matter which sect, he would be listed as a core disciple. Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't help but come up with a guess. Could it be, the old man had predicted that with the revival of spirit qi, there was a perfect candidate for possession, so he simply took advantage of this opportunity to seize Jiang Fengyan's body openly? He trapped himself in the soul crystal and tortured himself for thousands of years, just to welcome the glory of tomorrow? What a vicious heart. What a deep mind. People who were vicious to others were not scary. People who were vicious to themselves were the ones who were truly scary. Qin Shi's mind was in a whirl, but his face did not show any abnormality. His conversation with Jiang Yan was short, so it did not take up too much time. After saying that, Qin Shi turned his gaze to Wuxia. After all, this was his real enemy. It had to be said that the atmosphere above Daiyu Island was somewhat stifling. Wuxia was still holding 2 flags in his hands, flying alone not far away from the Jiang family. A dignified divine general of Tiandu was now covered in injuries, and he no longer had the sage-like aura he had before. However, even Wuxia's body emitted a sense of exhaustion, let alone the Jiang clan's people. Qin Shi only took a cursory glance, and found that the Jiang family's pride of 300 divine warriors had been reduced to just over 100. Moreover, they all looked dispirited, and there was even some despair and fear in their eyes. It was obvious that the Jiang family had paid a heavy price in this battle. It could be said that they had suffered a great loss. If it wasn't for his appearance that made the two sides stop fighting for a while, then it would not be long before. Then Daiyu Island would be completely wiped off the map by Wuxia. Alright, you guys go and rest. Leave this to me. Qin Shi twisted his neck, and after saying that, he directly flew forward a short distance, leaving himself to face Wuxia alone. This action clearly showed his attitude. Swap. From now on, Wushu's enemy was no longer the Jiang family, but him, Qin Shi. Mr. Qin. Actually, Qin Shi's idea was very simple. No matter what secrets were hidden, when the spirit energy tide appeared, Ying would feel dizzy and sick. It was also because Ying would feel dizzy and sick that he had to avoid this situation. How could he avoid it? Wasn't it just to disperse the spirit energy tide? Other than that, whether it was Chengdu or the Jiang family, it had nothing to do with him. In short, as long as he was on Earth, the spirit energy tide would not appear for a day. But, if the spirit energy tide did not appear, how could the heavenly gate open? How would the generals of Chengdu descend on Earth? This was simply a paradox. Therefore, it was destined that Qin Shi would stand on the opposite side of Chengdu. Unless, Chengdu took the initiative to hand over the heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror so that Qin Shi could check the secrets in it and completely cure Ying's dizziness. Otherwise, there was no way this matter could be resolved peacefully. A 9th-grade spirit treasure in each hand, whereas Gao Shui Fu. Qin Shi looked at Wushu from head to toe. After seeing that Wushu was covered in high-grade spirit treasures, he could not help but laugh and tease him. Just this alone was enough to show that Wushu's status was much higher than Bai Hong's. Therefore, Qin Shi was very interested in Wushu. He wanted to bring Wushu back to the underwater cave, light a candle, prepare a whip, and interrogate him. Wushu did not speak. He had been silently sizing up Qin Shi. Even after Qin Shi spoke, the expression on his face didn't change. Seeing that he did not speak, Qin Shi asked very generously, "You guys have been fighting for so long, do you want to rest for a while? Take some medicine to nourish your body or something." "No need." Wushu finally spoke. Qin Shi thought that he was going to continue fighting, so he shook his right hand and the flowing cloud sword flew out from his back. "Then come, don't say that I bullied you. I'll let you have 3 moves first, go ahead, I promise I won't fight back." After saying that, Qin Shi held the long sword in his hand and made an inviting gesture. Hearing that, Wushu still did not attack. Without seeing him do anything, the Wuji apricot yellow flag and the white bone soul beckoning banner in his hands suddenly disappeared, which made Qin Shi envious. Summer mustard seed bag? Tall, rich and handsome indeed. Qin Shi thought that Wushu was going to change his spirit treasures. But after a while, he only saw Wushu rubbing his face with his hand and then showing a dispirited expression. "I'm not fighting anymore, I'm already giving you Huan Tianzuan enough face. I'm tired, let's call it a day, Mr. Qin, right? My name is Wushu. We'll meet again someday, see you next time." Until then, Wushu finally returned to his previous sloppy self. In fact, he did not even think about fighting with Qin Shi, because he knew very well what he was capable of. Even if Wushu was in his best condition, he did not want to fight with Qin Shi, let alone now. The reason why he stayed here was mainly because he wanted to see Qin Shi. Now that he had seen him, he knew his name. It was time for him to leave. There was bound to be a day when they would meet again. As soon as he finished speaking, Wushu was like a pile of quicksand. He turned into thousands of grains of sand and slowly drifted away with the wind. Seeing that, Qin Shi frowned and suddenly slashed at the quicksand with his sword. Chapter 384. Under Qin Shi's watch, Wushu suddenly turned into a cloud of dust and dissipated in front of everyone's eyes. Qin Shi had come all the way here and had barely exchanged a few words. How could he allow this guy to escape so easily? Therefore, the moment Wushu's figure dissipated, Qin Shi drew his sword. As soon as the sword was drawn, the sky suddenly darkened. The long sword turned invisible and the twilight in the sky silently closed. Heaven and earth were silent. It was as if only one person, one sword, and one grain of sand were left. This was the earth escape technique of the 5 elements. It was also the escape technique that Wushu was proud of. As soon as this technique was drawn, Wushu's entire body was like thousands of dust and gravel in the air. It was invisible and unfathomable. But it was a pity. Wushu had underestimated Qin Shi's strength. If he had left before Qin Shi arrived, Daiyu Island would have been like his back garden. He could come and go as he pleased. Since Qin Shi was already here, it was destined that he would not be able to be as relaxed as before. Qin Shi still used the first move of the Moonlight Sword technique. The sword hid the void. Before the sword was drawn, the sword aura was hidden and not released. As soon as the sword was drawn, it was like a long river hanging upside down, soaring into the sky and into the clouds. Its speed was so fast that it was simply shocking. Jiang Jingqing was completely stunned by this sword. Even when he was chased by Qin Shi's flying sword all over the sky before, he did not feel that Mr. Chen was much stronger than he was. Until he saw this sword, Jiang Jingqing finally understood the gap between himself and Mr. Chen. It was like the gap between heaven and earth. The move was still the same move. However, in the past year or so, Qin Shi's condition had improved qualitatively. The demeanor of a divine lord was completely displayed at this moment. After Qin Shi slashed out with her sword, the sword light suddenly transformed into thousands of identical sword shadows as it flew through the air. These sword shadows didn't look very real, as if they didn't really exist in this world, so people mistakenly thought that these sword shadows were only the refraction of light, which was why they formed the illusion of one real sword and 10,000 fake swords. It looked like a kaleidoscope. Of all the people present, only Jiang Yan knew what was good for him. Marvelous, truly marvelous. Jiang Yan let out a heartfelt sigh. At this time, the sword gleam and the thousands of sword shadows had already arrived at Wushu's previous location. One grain of sand, one world, one leaf, one Bodhi. Since Wushu was trying to split himself into thousands of clones and escape from Qin Shi's sight using the Earth Escape technique, Qin Shi decided to use the Earth Escape technique. In that case, Qin Shi could only unleash 10,000 swords simultaneously, using the real sword to lock onto Wushu's chi dynamic, and the virtual sword to sweep through all things. Not a single grain of sand was spared. Bang! There was a silent and violent explosion. It was as if a piece of the sky had been forcefully ripped out, leaving a strange vacuum zone in the sky above Daiyu Island. In this vacuum there was no air, no dust, and even the sunlight seemed to be frozen. And this was clearly the real, a sword concealing the void. Crack! Suddenly the sky cracked open like a broken mirror. The light in that position began to distort, and a figure appeared out of thin air in the originally empty sky. First it was a pair of legs, then thighs, waist, chest, neck, and finally head. Wushu's figure slowly appeared. You? Wushu stared at his own body with wide eyes, and his face suddenly revealed an expression as if he had seen a ghost. To put it bluntly, this was the ultimate life-saving technique that he relied on to survive. How could it be so easily broken by Qin Shi? At this moment Wushu was really panicking. It's still so early, my daughter hasn't even finished school, why are you in such a hurry? After twirling his sword around, Qin Shi said to him with a smile. Wushu was silent. After taking a deep look at Qin Shi, he said with a solemn expression, Impossible, it's impossible for someone like you to appear in the lower realm. You, where did you come from? Wushu looked at Qin Shi with a strange expression. But after Qin Shi heard this, she only smiled and didn't care at all. Me? I came from Shangjing. He was born and raised on Earth, so why would he need to explain himself to anyone? Wushu did not believe him, but he did not argue with him. Instead, he quietly took out the white bone spirit summoning banner from his Sumeru mustard bag. It seemed like he had accepted his fate. Since he could not run, he could only fight. Seeing this, Qin Shi nodded with a smile and signaled him to make his move. The battle was about to begin. The members of the Jiang family held their breaths and looked at them nervously. They had already changed from participants to spectators. However, just when everyone thought that Wushu was going to start fighting, Wushu suddenly did something that shocked everyone. After he took out the white bone spirit summoning banner, he slapped himself hard on the chest, causing himself to spit out a mouthful of blood. The blood stained the banner, making the patterns on the banner even more eerie. Blood sacrifice? After seeing Wushu use his blood to dye the white bone spirit summoning banner red, even Qin Shi could not help but stop smiling. His expression became more serious because of this. After all, the blood that Wushu spat out was not simple. That was his blood essence. Since cultivators could unleash power beyond normal by burning their blood essence, then similarly, if one used their blood essence to feed a magic treasure, it would be able to unleash power beyond its current level. Therefore, when Wushu's blood essence splashed onto the banner, a terrifying murderous aura exploded from the white bone spirit summoning banner. In an instant, the Wushu flag was like a drop of ink in water. Countless black smoke gushed out from the flag and spread rapidly. The black smoke quickly covered the sky. At this moment, Wushu's voice sounded from the black smoke. You're giving me 3 moves, right? If that's the case, I won't be polite with you. Wushu is here, please enlighten me, mister. Following Wushu's roar, a surge of true essence surged out of the black smoke. Due to his previous promise, Qin Shi could only use his sword to protect himself. His body lit up with a golden light, wanting to use it to block Wushu's attack. However, the violent impact that Qin Shi imagined did not come. In his perception, the true essence in Wushu's body was like air in a balloon. Because it was so large, even the balloon burst. Then, the true origin energy surged out in all directions in a ring shape. Qinshi was stunned. Because he did not understand what Wushu's move was. Could it be that he was here to perform a fairy scattering flower? Qinshi was puzzled. Suddenly, he shuddered and then suddenly came back to his senses. Oh, this guy is trying to escape. This time it was really Qinshi's turn to be nervous. Not to mention anything else, if he really let Wushu escape from under his nose, he would lose a lot of face. Thinking of this, Qinshi immediately waved the sword in his hand. The sword light immediately shot out like the rising sun. Thousands of golden clusters of light instantly dispersed the black smoke and illuminated the entire sky. Unfortunately, Qinshi's reaction was still a beat slower. After the feint, Wusu had long disappeared from his sight. Since the elder ancestor had expressed his opinion, no matter how uncomfortable everyone was, they could only bow to Qinshi and say, "Thank you for saving our lives, mister." Seeing this, Qinshi also said politely with an awkward expression, "Everyone please rise. It's just a small matter. Everyone, there's no need to be so polite." Hearing this, Jiang Yan straightened his body, then lamented with a pained expression, "After this battle, the Jiang clan's vitality has been greatly damaged. Looking at this devastated Daiyu island, this old man's heart aches even more. All the sins were caused by this old man. This old man only hopes that this decision is not wrong. Otherwise, when this old man goes to the netherworld in the future, how can I face the ancestors of the Jiang clan? I, Jiang Yan, am the sinner of the Jiang clan." Jiang Yan was filled with grief and indignation. In a moment of agitation, 2 streams of turbid tears fell from the old man's eyes. Looking at his bloodshot eyes, even Qinshi, an outsider, could not bear to see it, let alone these reborn juniors of the Jiang clan. "Elder ancestor, you're right. Your decision is also for the sake of revitalizing the Jiang clan, and also for the sake of establishing the supreme glory of our clan in the future. The Jiang clan has not been defeated. As long as we are still alive, even if we are smashed to pieces, we will fight for a brand new future for the Jiang clan under your leadership. For the Jiang clan. Yes. Even if we are smashed to pieces, we will not retreat even half a step. F***CK, the divine general of Tiandu. In the future, if anyone dares to mention the word ascension in front of me, I will definitely not forgive him. From today onwards, the Jiang clan will definitely be at odds with Tiandu. Irreconcilable. Irreconcilable." When everyone saw Jiang Yan cry, the depression in their hearts immediately turned into endless grief and indignation. Suddenly, their morale was even higher than before. Qinshi stared dumbfoundedly at the scene in front of him. Everyone surrounded Jiang Yan and made bold statements. Jiang Yan, on the other hand, occupied Jiang Fengyan's young body. His face revealed an expression of great comfort. The more he looked at it, the more awkward he felt. Therefore, Qinshi couldn't help but sigh with emotion in his heart. This old fellow was really ruthless. He actually managed to win back the hearts of the people with just a few words. Although he didn't know the real purpose of Jiang Yan, Qinshi was now convinced by this old fellow from the bottom of his heart. No matter what Jiang Yan did, at least, he dared to raise the flag and become enemies with Tiandu, right? After Jiang Yan's post-battle speech, the fighting spirit of the Jiang clan was reignited. Qinshi was an outsider. Now that the crisis had been resolved, the Jiang clan was busy cleaning up the battlefield and rebuilding their home. He naturally couldn't stay here and be an eyesore, so he left silently. Before leaving, he also took the initiative to leave a restriction on Qixia Peak to prevent similar incidents from happening again. In fact, Qinshi also felt a little regretful in his heart. After all, there was an old saying, if you cut the grass without removing the roots, it will grow again when the spring breeze blows. Today he couldn't stop Wushu. Who knew what would happen in the future? In fact, with Wushu's shiny equipment, Qinshi absolutely didn't believe that he didn't have any life-saving skills. Did he really think that Wushu was a wild chicken on the roadside that could be killed at will? Therefore, Qinshi could only make up his mind now. If he could meet Wushu again next time, even if he used underhanded tricks, he must suppress him. Today's situation must not happen again. Qinshi recalled what he saw today while flying back to Shangjing. It was almost time. It was time to pick up Nian from school. At the same time, far in the northernmost part of the earth, a figure suddenly appeared on an iceberg floating on the sea. It was Wushu. After successfully escaping from Daiyu Island, Wuxia flew all the way here in one breath. If it wasn't for the fact that he used up so much energy, he would have directly flown to the moon. This place was already remote enough. Wuxia looked around. After confirming that there was no one here, he heaved a sigh of relief and sat cross-legged on the iceberg. As soon as he sat down, Wuxia felt a burst of tightness in his chest. He didn't even have time to take out a pill from his sumaru mustard seed bag before coughing out a mouthful of blood. The blood splattered on the pure white iceberg. It was particularly dazzling. It was obvious that he had suffered a very serious internal injury. However, this injury wasn't caused by Chen Shi. It was caused by himself. Many animals would choose to use self-mutilation to escape when their lives were in danger. For example, geckos would cut off their tails, spiders would cut off their legs, sea cucumbers would spit out their organs, and so on. The reason why Wuxia was able to escape from Chen Shi's eyes was because he used a method similar to this principle. That was blood escape. Using the blood escape would consume one's own essence blood. How important was essence blood to immortal cultivators? Wuxia would never use it unless he had no other choice. He was forced into a corner by Chen Shi. However, no matter what, it was better to be injured than to die, right? At the thought of this, Wuxia chuckled. He could not help but reveal a smug expression on his face. Bai Hong and Shui Xiang didn't know how to use this secret technique. He was the only one who knew how to use it. Mr. Chen, right? I'll remember you. You'll let me have 3 moves first, right? Just you wait. Next time I'll let 300 divine generals attack you once, and then I'll let you have 3 moves first. I'll keep my word. Wuxia looked up at the sky and threatened. However, he was so excited that he spat out another mouthful of blood. Do you think everything will be fine just because you've blocked the divine gate? At this moment, Wuxia had reverted back to his crazy self. He was severely injured, but instead of healing himself, he sat on the iceberg and muttered to himself. Master once said, the soul mirror will be unsealed within 10 years. Let me calculate the time. 1 year in heaven, 8 years on earth. If that's the case, doesn't that mean I'll have to stay in the lower realm for a full year? Wait, doesn't that mean I'll lose 10 years of my life for nothing? No wonder no one wants to come to the lower realm. Yuhuan Tianzuan, oh Yuhuan Tianzuan, I'm going to lose big this time. You'll have to make it up to me when the time comes. Chapter 386. November 1st, Halloween in the West. Although many kindergartens were celebrating the Western Festival now, Donghua Gate Kindergarten did not promote the Western Festival in the park due to its pure bloodline. Therefore, for the children in the park, today was just a very ordinary day. The only thing worth noting was probably the temperature today. Because winter had arrived in Shangjing again. This year's winter was slightly later than last year, but as soon as November passed, the trees on both sides of the street shed their leaves one after another. They held up the graceful branches of the dead trees as if they were welcoming the coming winter. The cold wind blew through the corner of the street and rolled up some leaves that had not been cleared. Perhaps because the kindergarten was next to the Forbidden City, it was particularly quiet here. In the alley, pedestrians hurriedly walked by in 2s and 3s, as if they did not want to stay in the cold wind for a moment longer. The road outside the kindergarten was already filled with cars that came to pick up children from school. The parents sat in the cars to keep warm and the cars breathed out heavy air. Only Chen Shi stood alone in front of the gate. He was wearing a black windbreaker and he was standing like a javelin. At first glance, Chen Shi looked a bit like a security guard in front of the sales department. Ding 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 as the pleasant bell rang, the park that had been asleep for a long time became lively again. The children were chattering about going home and the teacher had to let them line up. Then, class by class, they came to the gate to look for their parents. Chen Shi's side suddenly became lively. The parents scrambled to the side of the gate, wishing that they could immediately pull their children out from behind the iron gate. Chen Shi was not in a hurry and Yin Yin was not in a hurry either. This was because as soon as she walked out of the classroom, she saw Chen Shi's figure as usual. Chen Shi's figure, like a lighthouse on the sea, even if life was like waves and tides, he would always wait there firmly, silently waiting for Yin Yin to appear. Dad. 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 Yin Yin stood on the steps, excitedly waving her small hands at Chen Shi. The 2 brothers followed behind her, one on her left and one on her right. They looked like 2 incomparably loyal little guardians. The children of the older class had to walk last, so after most of the children had left with their parents, the 3 little fellows ran out of the school gate under the guidance of the teacher. As soon as she crossed the iron gate, She didn't even have time to hug her before the little girl very sensibly turned around and said to the teacher with a grin, "Goodbye, teacher." "Bye, Nian, Wen Mingming, see you tomorrow." "Good. See you tomorrow." Unknowingly, the two brothers had developed the habit of not wanting to go to school if they didn't see Nian. So now the three children were all picked up by Shi. Gulao only needed to wait in the tea house. It was not that he was discriminating against ordinary kindergartens. It was just that the threshold for kindergarten teachers was too low. Naturally, there were good and bad teachers. Therefore, it was difficult for ordinary kindergarten's teachers to be as meticulous and patient as Donghua Gate Kindergarten. And this was the so-called professionalism. Under the patient guidance of the teachers, in addition to changing her accent, Nian's wild nature, which had been spoiled by Shi and his wife, gradually began to be restrained. In the beginning, under the guidance of Aunt Zhang, Nian was like a little girl in the mountains. At a young age, she knew that she had to share the burden of the family and never cause trouble for Aunt Zhang. Later, Shi and his wife came back, and the family of three was finally reunited. Nian also became a small-town girl born in a rich family. Just like the song said, "You only know how to look at the stars in the sky foolishly. You're so pure." The return of her parents allowed her to find the greatest happiness in the world. Carefree and free. But it was also because of Shi's fatherly attitude of holding her in his hands and fearing that she would fall and melt in his mouth that Nian gradually let go of the nature of a child. She learned to be coquettish, naughty, shameless, and throw a tantrum. But it was also at this time that only then could he be considered a complete child. Later, Nian went to kindergarten, and it was a model kindergarten that was ranked in the country. Under the patient guidance of the teachers, Nian changed again. And at this moment, she truly became a lady from a wealthy family. However, there were too few people in this wealthy family. At most, it was a family of three, plus his father-in-law and sister-in-law's family, of course, whether it was a mountain girl, a small-town girl, or a lady from a wealthy family. To Shi, Nian would always be the smart, sensible, lively, and cute Nian. He only wanted Nian to grow up happily. Carefree, free, and unrestrained. No worries in the world should appear in Nian's young heart. In fact, Shi really wanted to tell her sometimes. No matter what happens in the future, even if the sky falls down, Nian, don't be afraid, don't be sad, and don't be sad. That's because I'll take care of you. Dad. The teacher gave us a little red flower today. What? Because we're good at drawing. What about the painting? On the wall behind the classroom. The teacher said that at the next parent-teacher meeting, she will show our painting to you. Nian was wearing a pink down jacket today and a rabbit ear hat on her head. Coupled with her rosy cheeks, she looked extremely adorable. She sat in Shi's arms, and when she was excited, her little body couldn't help but gently twist. Chapter 387. Now that the matters on Daiyu Island were settled, Shi's life returned to normal. The life of an ordinary person. Naturally, it was dull and repetitive. Nian spent most of her time in kindergarten, so the tea house was fully taken care of by Qiao Yuan. Qiao Yuan graduated from the best university in Wuxia, so a small tea house was not a problem for her. College students nowadays were very smart. Perhaps it was because Qiao Yuan had been living with Shi's family for a long time, so under the influence of Shi's family, Qiao Yuan looked more mature. She was very smart and knew what to listen to and what not to listen to. She also knew what to ask and what not to ask. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. In Qiao Yuan's eyes, Shi's family was a hidden expert. Therefore, she did not know when it started, but there was a slight change in her thinking. In the past, Qiao Yuan was just an ordinary college student who had gone astray. She did not have any plans for the future. She always felt that after she graduated, she would find a suitable job according to her major. But now, Qiao Yuan did not want to live the rest of her life like this. Although Shi's family was always thinking about where to go and play, they did not set a good example for her at all. But under her rich imagination, she was able to completely fill in the background of Shi and her husband. The boss and lady boss. They were the modern version of Yanghua and Xiaolong. They had seen the prosperity of the world, crossed thousands of mountains and rivers, but in the end, they resolutely chose to retreat from the turbulence and live a seemingly ordinary, but happy and stable life with their loved ones. This was Qiao Yuan's dream, and also her role model in life. It was just that Shi's family had reached the end, while she had just started. Qiao Yuan was in her 4th year of university this year, and her mind was gradually becoming more active. In fact, not to mention Qinshi's family, even the retired old man Gulao was not simple. Although the two brothers looked like losers all day long, in fact the moment they were born, they were already rich second-generation heirs. After all, the two of them had a courtyard house in Hohai. It was very valuable. The little girl's mind was active, and she didn't know what Qinshi was busy with recently, so the responsibility of playing chess and chatting with Gulao naturally fell on her shoulders. Needless to say, this old man and young man actually got along quite well. Although Gulao didn't specifically teach Qiao Yuan anything, this little girl would always inadvertently learn things that couldn't be learned in school. Qiao Yuan was accumulating herself, just like the sweeping monks in the scripture depository. When she decided to leave the small tea house, it was time for her to set sail and usher in her brilliant life. Day after day, the cycle repeated itself. Like a sponge, Qiao Yuan studied and improved herself crazily, while Gulao enjoyed the rest of his life. Qin Ruoying was in closed-door cultivation all day long, and Qinshi rarely showed up except to take the three children to and from school. Because Qinshi was busy with something important. A very, very big thing. For this, after Qinshi sent Nian to school every day, he had to cross the entire Pacific Ocean and go to the United States, which was far away on the other side of the ocean. Of course, Qinshi didn't go to the United States for fun but for work. The Adumbra flower was so precious, naturally, it couldn't be refined with an ordinary iron basin. And Qinshi didn't have enough materials to refine a new alchemy furnace, so refining the Adumbra flower became a big problem. So after thinking about it, Qinshi finally decided to use the power of nature to refine the elixir. That was, heaven and earth as the furnace, nature as the work, yin and yang as the charcoal, all things as the copper. Therefore, the supervolcano in Yellowstone Park was his first choice. The so-called supervolcano was a large-scale eruption volcano that could change the world's weather after eruption and even threaten human beings. Yellowstone Park was once the world's largest national park, and Yellowstone Volcano was the world's largest supervolcano. Mount Fuji was an active volcano, but it wasn't a supervolcano, so it didn't have the qualifications to enter Qinshi's consideration. Refining elixir was a very complicated thing. The energy cultivation elixir that he refined in the past was actually rubbish, so Qinshi didn't care at all. Now that he finally had the best ingredients, Qinshi naturally had to pay 120% attention. Configuring the prescription, screening the ingredients, analyzing the medicinal properties, choosing the furnace, and so on. After doing all this preliminary work, Qinshi could officially start refining the elixir. This day, December 1st, Shangjing had just welcomed the first snow, but Yellowstone Park was already covered in snow. Looking around, the dense pine forests rose and fell, and the rolling mountains were covered in morning fog. Animal footprints crisscrossed the snowy plains, and hot springs rose and fell one after another. Because the world's largest supervolcano was buried below, Yellowstone Park had a wonderful scenery that was difficult to see in other places during winter. When the warm water vapor sprayed into the cold air, the water molecules would instantly solidify into a rain of small ice pellets, forming an extremely rare geothermal fountain. So what kind of park was this? It was simply a paradise on Earth. Yellowstone Park covered an area of up to 9,000 square kilometers, one-third larger than Zhonghai's 6,000 square kilometers. Because of the need to close off the mountains to cultivate forests, the park would be completely closed at the end of October and would only reopen in mid-December. During this time, only a few scenic spots could be visited. Therefore, when Qinshi arrived at the park, there was not a single tourist in the huge park. This was not the first time he had been here. After the volcanic eruption cooled down, it would produce hard and impermeable basalt. After rainfall, it would generally produce a large lake. Therefore, the crater of Yellowstone Park was not protruding like Mount Fuji, but hidden under Yellowstone Lake. Could even be said that the entire Yellowstone Park was located on the crater of the volcano. Qinshi plunged into Yellowstone Lake, then followed the tunnel he had previously dug and quickly flew underground. The reason why it was called a supervolcano was because there was a magma reservoir with a diameter of 70 kilometers and a thickness of about 10 kilometers below the crater. In fact, a volcano was like a pressure cooker. Once the internal temperature rose to a certain level, the magma inside would instantly erupt. Qinshi set up a restriction in the magma reservoir. Then he put all the medicinal herbs he had collected during this period of time inside, such as the Adumbra flower, bloodthorn grass, ginseng flowers, and all kinds of precious medicinal herbs that could be found in the world. Rare and precious treasures were produced from the earth. With the calcination and extraction of the underground fire essence, Coupled with the continuous washing of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, the medicinal properties of the medicinal herbs could be released most effectively. Qin Shi used the restriction to bind the medicinal properties and continuously quenched and compressed them together. The released medicinal properties would gradually change from a gaseous state to a liquid state, and finally to a solid state. When the medicinal herbs were exhausted, it was time for the elixir to be produced. What was the most important thing in alchemy? It was neither the medicinal herbs nor the technique. It was the last step before the elixir was formed. Because this was not an ordinary Chinese medicine, the moment the elixir was produced, it was like forcibly opening the lid of the pressure cooker. Boiling hot steam would instantly rush out. What Qin Shi had to do was to smoothly take the elixir out of the furnace from this boiling hot steam. It sounded very simple. But what if the steam was replaced with the spirit energy of heaven and earth? The Adumbra flower's grade was very high, and the elixir it produced was at least a 9th grade elixir. Thus, the accumulation of more than 3,000 years would completely erupt the moment the furnace was opened, along with the elixir. If Qin Shi did not immediately take the elixir and use a secret technique to bind the elixir, then the medicinal properties of the elixir would rapidly dissipate, turning back into spirit energy and dissipating into heaven and earth. And precisely because of this, when cultivators refined high-grade elixirs, they would usually use a high-grade alchemy furnace. On one hand, it was to extract the medicinal properties more effectively. On the other hand, it was for safety reasons, using the alchemy furnace to resist the impact of the elixir when it was produced. Qin Shi did not have an alchemy furnace, so he could only do it himself. This was a battle. It was a battle between Qin Shi and the elixir. If he could not successfully take the elixir from the sudden explosion of spirit energy, if it was light, the elixir would be destroyed, and if it was heavy. Chapter 388. The interior of the volcano might be different from what many people imagined. It was hollow like an iron box and it was filled with boiling magma. The so-called magma was actually a silicate substance that had melted into a molten state due to high temperature. It would show different colors according to the temperature. The higher the temperature, the lighter the color. Under the illumination of the flames, the magma reservoir buried under Yellowstone Park was a colorful underground world. In addition to the red magma, the magma reservoir was mainly red and yellow. The yellow was sulfur and the red was iron. In addition, there was a black substance at the top of the magma reservoir. This black substance was the surface of the rock formed by the cooling of the gas. Yellowstone Park supervolcano would erupt once every 600,000 years. The last time was about 630,000 years ago. Therefore, this supervolcano had entered the eruption cycle and could erupt at any time. Scientists had used computers to simulate the eruption. Once the supervolcano in Yellowstone Park erupted, 90% of the people within 1,000 kilometers would not be spared. Most of them would die from inhaling the volcanic ash, which would cause their lungs to solidify. In other words, most of the United States would become a land of death. There was no chance of survival. After the eruption, the volcanic ash that was spewed out by the magma would drift to every corner of the earth within 2 days. Then the nuclear winter would arrive. The thick volcanic ash would cover most of the world. Sunlight would not be able to reach the earth. A large number of animals and plants would begin to die, and black acid rain would cover the entire world. This process would last for at least 3 to 6 months. In other words, once the supervolcano erupted, not only would the United States suffer, but the entire world would fall into a food crisis. The disaster movie 2012 had already shown this point. After all, Qin Shi was not a geologist. Therefore, when he chose the location of the pill refinement, he only focused on finding the largest volcano and did not consider other problems at all. The refinement of the pill had reached the final stage. Qin Shi floated at the top of the magma reservoir. The ball of light directly below him was the heaven and earth furnace that he had set up. In addition, he had even set up a spirit gathering formation here. With Yellowstone Park as the center, all the spirit energy within 100 miles flowed into it, so that the entire magma reservoir was filled with rich spirit energy of heaven and earth. It was like a balloon that had been stretched to its limit, and could explode at any time. Lava surged and earth fire raged. Heaven and earth were the furnace, and spiritual energy was the charcoal. Under the continuous burning of the earth fire, the medicinal properties of the Adumbra flower were completely unleashed. Once the spirit pill was formed, the restriction would fall apart, and the compressed spirit chi of heaven and earth would explode in an instant. Its intensity would not be inferior to a large-scale spirit chi tide. In fact, it was even more ferocious and surging than the tide of spiritual energy. At the same time, it was also more threatening. Qin Shi waited patiently, focusing all his attention on the ball of light. Suddenly, a slight cracking sound came from the top of the magma chamber. Crack. It was a very weak sound. Before Qin Shi could react, the faint cracking noise had turned into a series of loud rumbling noises. The earth seemed to be torn apart. Immediately afterward, the volcanic passage that had been deposited for hundreds of thousands of years came alive again. The strong air pressure continued to rise, trying to find a way to vent. The mountain could not withstand the pressure, and huge cracks began to appear, spreading all the way to the surface at an extremely fast speed. The cracks grew bigger and more numerous. Countless huge rocks continued to fall from above. The moment the huge rocks smashed into the magma below, the magma boiled and sparks flew everywhere. Qin Shi was stunned. Until this moment, he didn't even realize what a terrible thing he was doing. The earth began to tremble. Under the pressure, countless cracks appeared on the inside of the mountain. The cracks reached the surface. In an instant, countless geothermal fountains erupted from Yellowstone Park at the same time. Because the temperature was too high, the snow on the surface began to sublimate, turning from a solid to a gas in an instant. A thick fog shrouded the park. At the same time, earthquake alarms sounded in several cities around Yellowstone Park. The tremors grew stronger and stronger. This was not an earthquake, but the supervolcano had begun to become active. Under the pressure, the weak surface of the earth began to bulge, undulating strangely like waves. Birds cried out and beasts howled. Countless animals ran out of the park, and flocks of birds flew across the sky, blotting out the sun. The only thing worth celebrating was, it was probably because Yellowstone Park was not open to tourists during this period of time. This place was freezing cold. Other than a few park staff, there were not many people. Qin Shi was inside the magma chamber so he could see more clearly. He saw the mountain collapse. He also saw the magma boiling. Originally, he came to pick up the medicine happily, but he did not expect to witness a volcanic eruption with his own eyes. Qin Shi finally realized the seriousness of the matter. But just as he was about to find a way to contain the volcanic eruption, the elixir came out of the furnace without warning. The sudden burst of spiritual energy forced him to take a few steps back. Chapter 389. The supervolcano erupted. At that moment, the entire world seemed to have quieted down. The crater of the volcano was like a lit-up firework. First, it emitted a cloud of smoke that covered the sky, then it suddenly exploded into the sky. In an instant, a mushroom cloud formed by volcanic ash and steam rose into the sky, almost breaking through the clouds. Dark red magma spewed out along with the billowing black smoke. The red-hot rocks were pushed into the sky and exploded like fireworks, then fell in all directions. From afar, it looked like thousands of meteors had passed by, leaving streaks of fiery red marks in the sky. At the same time, the shock waves that accompanied the explosion spread out wave after wave. Countless boulders were blown away by the strong wind, and countless trees were uprooted. The accumulated snow on the ground turned into white smoke and drifted in all directions. At that moment, all living things cried out and the plants bowed their heads. Because sound traveled the slowest, after the shock waves exploded, the loud rumbling sound began to spread out in all directions. The entire earth was shaking violently. Magma spewed out from the crater of the volcano, black smoke filled the sky, and hot flames swallowed a large area of land. This was the anger of nature. All living things were destined to be doomed, and could only helplessly fall into this terrible disaster. This scene, it must be the so-called, the birth of a drought demon. Thousands of miles of land were barren. Starving people were everywhere and not even a blade of grass grew. Qin Shi turned into a golden light and flew out of the thick smoke. When he saw the scene in front of him, he finally realized what he had done. The huge Yellowstone Park had become a purgatory. Magma spewed out from the crater of the volcano, spreading out wave after wave. Magma spread all over the ground like a bright red wound and blood was gushing out. This was definitely an accident. Qin Shi looked at the scene in front of him, dumbfounded. After he came back to his senses, he began to think about how to remedy the situation. After all, he was not a patriot. Although the United States was annoying, the people of the United States were innocent. Qin Shi's worldview was not so twisted and dark. How to remedy it? This was really a problem. Volcanic eruptions were not short-lived, but rather a continuous process. Once this hole was opened, magma would continuously gush out from the ground. This would last for at least a few hours, at most a few days or even a few years. Rain could not extinguish a volcano. This was because volcanoes were not only found on land. There were also volcanoes under the sea. Even the sea could not extinguish a volcano, let alone a few heavy rains. She looked at the crater with a worried expression. After thinking for a long time, he finally came up with the simplest and most violent method, and that was, he directly blocked the volcanic crater. Just like the pressure cooker, wouldn't the problem be solved once the lid was put back on? This restriction didn't even need to be too exquisite. It just needed to be hard and strong enough to withstand the pressure from the magma reservoir. Thinking of this, Shi immediately began to work hard to arrange. As long as they acted quickly, they might be able to save many lives before the magma spread to the nearby cities. While Shi was busy cleaning up the mess, Karakoram. This was a place Shi was very familiar with. However, this place hid many secrets that no one knew about. It was cold here. Other than the snowy mountains that had not melted for thousands of years, there was only the blue sky and white clouds. There were many mountains here. After climbing over a tall mountain, one would see countless tall mountains. Above the white snow, in the middle of the vast mountain range, there was a seemingly ordinary 10,000-year-old snow mountain. It was not high enough, nor was it dangerous enough. In addition to this remote terrain, it did not even have a widely spread name. It was just the most inconspicuous mountain among the vast mountains. However, 10,000 years ago, it also had a very beautiful name, which was Floating Mist Mountain. The green grass could be waves and the blue sea could be dust. The green hills could be turned into a flowing ocean, and the sea could also be turned into the land where dust had settled. Tens of thousands of years had passed. The glory of Floating Mist Mountain had turned to dust with time. The current Floating Mist Mountain was probably just a barren snowy mountain. But today, however, this barren snowy mountain welcomed an uninvited guest. Jiang Yin. In fact, since the moment Wuxia attacked Diyu Island, there was no such person as Jiang Fengyan in this world. A 20-year-old body and a 1,000-year-old soul. After a month of recuperation, Jiang Yin had completely adapted to this body, so with every movement he made, his body naturally exuded a weather-beaten feeling. Jiang Yin stepped on the snow and walked slowly, step by step. It was like an ant walking on a painting. Although it was small, it was very obvious. It seemed that this was not the first time Jiang Yin had come here. But perhaps because it had been too long, he would stop and look around after a few steps to make sure that he did not take the wrong path. He did not fly but walked slowly on the snow. But as he walked, Jiang Yan's figure actually disappeared into thin air just like that. Because he walked into a formation. The instant he stepped into the array formation, a passageway appeared before Jiang Yan's eyes. Jiang Yan did not even hesitate and walked straight into the tunnel. There was no light source in the tunnel, it was pitch black. But Jiang Yan had no intention of lighting a light at all. He continued to walk forward without stopping. He did not know how far he had walked before a faint light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Seeing this, a faint smile immediately appeared on Jiang Yan's face. At the end of the tunnel was a hall. There was only a faint green light source inside. From afar it looked like a will-o'-the-wisp. It wandered in the hall while emitting a dim light. The moment Jiang Yan stepped into the hall, an old voice sounded in the hall. "Oh, who's here?" "It's me, Jiang Yan." The young man's voice was good. The energetic voice suddenly formed a sharp contrast with the lifeless voice. And as soon as Jiang Yan's voice fell, the hall that had been silent for a long time seemed to come alive again. "Jiang Yan. Jiang Yan. Jiang Yan." Countless different voices sounded in every corner of the hall. Just like the many spectators sitting around, the moment they saw Jiang Yan appear, they cheered in unison. But these voices sounded like the voices of dried corpses. It was dry and shriveled, and at the same time, it was a bit harsh and hoarse. Jiang Yan seemed to enjoy the feeling of being the center of attention. After a while, he raised his arms and signaled for everyone to be quiet. The cheers stopped abruptly. At this time, Jiang Yan faced the center of the hall and said slowly, "I'm sure you all know what's going on outside. So now I just want to ask, the oath back then, is it still valid now?" After that, Jiang Yan began to look around. But no one answered him. The entire hall was silent. It was quiet and empty. It was as if he was the only living person in the room. Jiang Yan stood in the center of the hall and waited silently. After a long while, the old voice sounded again. "How can the oath of the 9 serenities be taken lightly? Since you have decided to come out, we will not continue to endure here. Go ahead and make the arrangements. If there is no doubt, I am willing to respect Jiang Yan as the co-leader of the 9 Serenities and lead us to fight against Tiandu. Do you have any objections? As soon as this question was asked, there was a sound of agreement in the hall. Seconded. 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 Just like the company's board of directors, Jiang Yan was officially elected as the new CEO of the 9 Serenities. There were 9 levels of heaven and 9 levels of earth. There was Tiandu above and the 9 Serenities below. The 2 words 9 Serenities were the fundamental reason why Jiang Yan dared to go against Tiandu. For this, he was even willing to sacrifice the entire Jiang family and offer up all the remaining celestials on Daiyu Island for the 9 Serenities to take. Because what he wanted. Chapter 390. After Qin Shi busied himself for half a day, the mess in Yellowstone Park was finally cleaned up. For this reason, he specially set up a super large restriction to completely seal the magma reservoir. In fact, this could be regarded as a blessing in disguise. After Qin Shi's messing around, part of the pressure on the Yellowstone Park supervolcano had been removed. Coupled with the effect of the restriction, the next natural eruption of this volcano was estimated to be tens of thousands of years later. If the United States knew the truth of this matter, they would probably only be grateful to Qin Shi and would worship him as their ancestor. It was just a short eruption. Although the scale was large, the destructive power was always limited. The only thing that was painful to lose was probably the beautiful natural scenery of Yellowstone Park. Even if they immediately began to rebuild it, it would take many years to form an ecological chain of today's scale. Of course, these losses were not for Qin Shi to worry about. He had done what he could and made up for what he could. Therefore, after carefully checking the restriction, Qin Shi happily took the spirit pill and embarked on the return journey. Perhaps because he was in a good mood during the flight to Wuxia, he took out the spirit pill from time to time to observe it. Just a whiff of this fragrant scent was enough to make one intoxicated. Although the grade of this spirit pill was not as high as he imagined, it could barely reach the 6th or 7th grade. After all, the supplementary ingredients were just some ordinary medicinal materials. It was already very good to be able to reach this standard. And with the current conditions on Earth, how could Qin Shi not be satisfied with the fact that such a high-grade spirit pill could be refined? Humans should always be content with what they have. Refining pills was a craft, and it could not be done without some experience. Refining pills according to a recipe was something that only a worker would do. With Qin Shi's years of experience coupled with his understanding of medicinal materials and pharmacology, he could naturally configure a prescription that was really suitable for the current situation based on the existing materials. Therefore, this spirit pill was absolutely unique. It didn't even have a name. Even if one searched the entire Heavenly Jade domain, they wouldn't be able to find a second one. Naturally, the naming rights fell to Qin Shi. However, he didn't have any fancy ideas at all. He didn't even bother to come up with a name. He directly began to think about how to divide up the spirit pills. There was only one spirit pill, but it could be divided into several portions. He cut it in half and gave the other half to Ying. The remaining half would be divided into 3 parts, one for him and one for Nian Yan. Then the last portion would be cut in half. So after hesitating for a moment, the little girl frowned and whispered softly, "I like both. Dad's cooking is delicious. I like Dad." The moment he heard this sentence, the expression on Qin Shi's face was very rich. "So if your father doesn't know how to cook, you won't like him?" The little girl's answer wasn't wrong, but it wasn't perfect. After the teacher's guidance, she finally realized the importance of her father, so she quickly nodded and affirmed, "Even if Dad's cooking isn't good, I like Dad." Children's words carried no harm. It was actually quite interesting to listen to children talk when they had nothing to do. After the little girl sat down, it was the brothers' turn. Because they were twins, the 2 of them drew a picture together. The teacher asked questions as usual, but she didn't expect to make a mistake here, and that was, she didn't find out the child's family situation clearly. Therefore, when the teacher casually asked who was the father, the brothers exploded on the spot. "We don't have a father. Old Gu didn't teach them this, and the old man wasn't so petty. In fact, it was Gu Yao who taught them this. Perhaps it was because she quarreled with Xia Kaiji when she was alive, so Gu Yao had been holding back her resentment after she died, so she would instill this idea in the brothers from time to time. Of course, they had to listen to what their mother said. So, they didn't have a father." When the brothers shouted this sentence in unison, the teacher knew that something bad had happened. Sure enough, As soon as the brothers finished speaking, the other children were surprised and started to talk about it. Teacher, is he a wild child without a father? Mom told me before. If I'm taken away by bad people, then I'll lose my parents and can only become a wild child. Wild child. He's a wild child. Wild child. In recent years, the divorce rate had been increasing, and the impact of parents' divorce on children was definitely the most profound and heavy. This was a sensitive topic. Therefore, the kindergarten teacher paid attention to this issue, and even specifically investigated the family situation of each child before entering school. She didn't think much at that time, and directly said the names of Xia Kaiji and Gu Yao. He never thought that the brothers wouldn't recognize this father at all. Chapter 391. Schools nowadays paid attention to humanized teaching. Whether it was kindergarten, primary school, or secondary school, a qualified teacher would always prevent the children from facing these problems directly. Of course, there were also many retarded teachers who would not care about these details at all. Knowing that there were children in the class who had lost their father at a young age, the teacher still assigned similar essay topics such as, my father, father, I want to tell you, father's love, and so on. If this was not retarded, then what was? How should the children write? Should they rely on their imagination to make it up? In fact, this was not an essay at all, but a sharp knife inserted into the children's chests. The children were still so young. If they could enlighten and encourage themselves to successfully walk out of their psychological trauma, then all the child psychologists in the world could be fired. According to the education philosophy of Donghua Gate Kindergarten, this kind of situation was absolutely not allowed to happen. Once the principal found out, the teacher would immediately pack up and leave. Therefore, after hearing the brothers shout that they did not have a father, even the teacher was shocked. It was human nature to be exclusive. Most of the children in the class were either rich or respectable. They had lived in different circles since they were young, so naturally they were more exclusive than ordinary children. Without a father, the brothers were the outliers in the eyes of this group of children. Outliers would always be excluded. When the children shouted "wild children" for the first time, the brothers were labeled as outliers on their foreheads. Regarding this problem, the brothers were very calm. The two of them stood upright in the middle of the classroom, and there was no intention of avoiding the gaze in their eyes. Because in their eyes, this was the truth. And the facts also proved that they only needed their mother and grandpa. Of course, the brothers did not have much of a reaction, mainly because they had not experienced what Nian had experienced. They had not been ridiculed and ostracized by children of the same age, so naturally, they did not understand that the words "no father" could not be said casually. The class suddenly became lively. Seeing this, the teacher could only quickly signal for everyone to be quiet. But at this moment, the little girl at the side suddenly flipped out. "Don't talk nonsense." Nian stood up from her seat and then shouted at the class with righteous indignation, "They are not wild children." The little girl was very angry. On one hand, it was because the two brothers were the closest to her. On the other hand, it was because she had a deeper understanding of the word "wild child." She didn't like those three words, so naturally she wouldn't allow others to say that about her little friend. Wenwen and Mingming's father is on a business trip. My father used to go on business trips too. He only returned after a very long time. That's why they called me a wild child. Let me tell you, I'm not a wild child. My father is back. He comes to school every day to bring me home. Wenwen and Mingming's father will come back too. I'm not a wild child. They are not wild children. We are not wild children. While speaking, the little guy suddenly burst into tears. After all, he was still a child. It was not easy for her to defend herself under such circumstances. After Nian's interruption, the teacher finally came back to his senses and immediately comforted her. Then the teacher used Nian's words and began to guide the children in the class. Everyone's parents were not at home sometimes, so they couldn't be called wild children because of that, right? In order to prevent the two brothers from causing trouble again, the teacher didn't even dare to let them speak again. He directly let them sit back in their seats and play a little game with Nian. When Nian gradually stopped crying, the teacher decisively changed the theme of the day, and then led the children to sit on the small train outside the house. There were 3 teachers in a class. The main teacher made such a big mistake, so the teachers in the side class should report it to the principal. But considering that everyone was in the same boat, the teachers in the side class concealed this matter. The small disturbance soon subsided. Nian's little face showed a smile again, but the two brothers' faces showed a thoughtful expression. Perhaps from this moment on, the shadow of their father gradually emerged from the bottom of their hearts? She was like a bystander, silently watching the whole process. To be honest, when he saw Yin stand up and passionately defend the two brothers, he, as a father, was really shocked. That feeling was hard to describe. In short, Yin's performance today made him very satisfied. He didn't raise his daughter in vain. Dad will always love you. Forever and ever. Happy, she called the big cat who had been squatting on the wall pillar and dozing off. Then he scraped a layer of skin from the elixir and threw it to the big cat. This guy was lying on the school wall every day doing nothing but sleeping. Today the leader happened to be inspecting, so he was happy and gave it such a big gift. It was really a blessing from the sky. The big cat happily jumped around Chinshi's feet like a dog. Chinshi was waiting for the little guy to finish school while thinking about the two brothers. He really had to find time to talk to old Gu. Regardless of the grudge between Xia Kaiji and Gu Yao, the child was innocent. How could he instill such thoughts in the child? This kind of thinking was unacceptable. Chapter 392. December 22nd, Winter Solstice. Although this year's winter came late, the snowfall was not much worse than last year's. Snow fell like goose feathers. After a night, a thick layer of snow piled up in the alley. The little guy had been talking about skating all day, but he did not know that the ice rink in Hohai would not open for another month. Everything was the same as usual. After the little guy cuddled with Chenshi as usual, he got up and went to school. Chenshi stayed behind the wall until he finished watching the little guy do his morning exercises. Then he slowly strolled back to Dongming Alley like an ordinary person who got up early for a walk. But what was different from usual was, Chenshi met an acquaintance at the entrance of the alley today. Mr. Chen, long time no see. The person was Jiang Yan. Jiang Yan was wearing a long black down jacket and a gray wool hoodie on his head, hiding his long hair. Jiang Yan's current appearance. He looked no different from the young people you could see on the street. The only difference was that he still had an outstanding temperament that was as deep as the abyss. Why are you here? She never thought that Jiang Yan would come to Shangjing and even find him at his door. So the moment he saw Jiang Yan, he was a little surprised. Could it be that this old guy had been stuck in the soul crystal for too long and wanted to wander around after taking over his body? Haha, actually it's like this. After I took the elixir you gave me, I realized that this elixir was extraordinary. You must have added a lot of rare herbs in it, right? Jiang Yan laughed. After seeing Chenshi extend his hand and make a pleased gesture, he immediately followed Chenshi into the courtyard. The visitor was a guest, so he had to at least show some basic courtesy. So, Chenshi led Jiang Yan to the main hall and made him a pot of tea. I did add a lot of things, but they are just some common herbs. The most important thing is your adumbra flower. After hearing Chenshi's words, Jiang Yan immediately laughed and said, the Jiang family doesn't have such exquisite alchemy skills like yours. After your careful concoction, this adumbra flower really showed its medicinal effects. If that's the case, the Jiang family has really profited. Jiang Yan seemed very happy. Seeing this, Chenshi laughed a few times. She was too lazy to be polite with him. As long as he was happy, it was fine. In fact, after Chenshi thought that this elixir would definitely end up in Jiang's stomach, he cut the Jiang family's portion in half, and planned to leave the other half for Lin Xian. After all, he should not let the goodies. The old man had been hiding in the soul crystal for so many years, so he probably had accumulated a huge amount of vital energy. Thinking about it, this little bit was not too much and this little bit was not too little. He just had to make do with it. To be honest, based on the amount that Jiang Yan had consumed, it was probably not as effective as directly swallowing the adumbra flower. Therefore, even if Chenshi used her butt to think, she knew that the old man must have other motives for coming to her door today. Alright, you don't have to be so polite with me. Chenshi did not have the time to talk nonsense with him, so he asked directly, tell me, why did you come all the way here? Hearing this, the smile on Jiang Yan's face became even more cheerful. Actually, it's nothing much, I just wanted to come out for a walk and pay you a visit. At this point, Jiang Yan's gaze fell on the couplet in the middle of the main hall. The heavenly gate is broken, the river opens, the jade water flows east. However, his gaze did not linger for long, then he put on a rather emotional expression and sighed. White clouds for 1,000 years, the sky is long. Look at this world, where does it look like it used to? When I came here, I even took that big guy called an airplane. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I definitely wouldn't believe it. Now, even mortals can ride the clouds and travel thousands of miles in a day. It's just like what the ancestors said, a day in the mountains is 1,000 years in the world. I think it's time for Daiyu Island to change its philosophy. The Jiang family can't always live in the past, we should try to integrate into the present. The old man was a chatterbox, and once he opened his mouth he would not stop muttering. After listening for a while, Qin felt a headache coming on, so he found an excuse to send him out. No wonder everyone said that the older a person was, the more long-winded they became. This old man had been holding it in for thousands of years. If he really let him continue, wouldn't he talk for 3 days and 3 nights? Alright, then I won't disturb you. Have a good rest, I'll go to the Great Wall again. Ha! Jiang Yin stood in the alley and waved goodbye to Qin with a smile. After Qin chuckled, he didn't even bother to exchange pleasantries and directly closed the door. Bye-bye to you. Jiang Yin didn't feel offended at all. When he turned and walked out of the alley, there was even a faint smile on his face. After that, Jiang Yin strolled leisurely on the streets, looking around from time to time. He looked like a tourist who had just arrived in the city. However, just as Jiang Yin walked out of the main street, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. Jiang Yin glanced at him and said coldly, "There are people coming and going here, can't you wait until there's no one before you appear?" Hearing this, that person said indifferently, "They're just a bunch of ants, so what if they see us? They'll only think that their eyes are playing tricks on them." Enough. Jiang Yin seemed to be quite dissatisfied with this person's approach, so his face turned cold on the spot. Chapter 393. December 24th. Christmas Eve, Christmas Eve. With the rapid development of Wuxia over the years, the common people gradually began to understand and accept Western culture. Christmas was the most important holiday in Western countries. No matter how much Donghua Gate Kindergarten promoted traditional culture, they could not deliberately ignore it. Otherwise, how was it different from closing the country off? Therefore, Christmas was the only Western festival that Donghua Gate Kindergarten celebrated. Since it was a holiday, they naturally had to arrange themed activities. Playing with the children was secondary. The school mainly wanted the children to understand the differences between Chinese and Western culture more easily and understand the meaning of Christmas. They also hoped to cultivate the children's interest in learning English. After all, no matter how Wuxia developed in the future, it was imperative to integrate with the international community. Therefore, learning English was definitely beneficial to the children. The winter break would start in the middle of next month. Therefore, the kindergarten would usually set this day as the Winter Parent-Child Activity Day, requiring the parents to attend. The parent-child activity could not only promote the emotional exchange between the children and their parents, but it was also beneficial to the healthy growth of the children's body and mind. Naturally, its importance was needless to say. The kindergarten hoped that every child's parents could be present. For this reason, they gave the parents a notice half a month in advance, which could be considered as leaving sufficient time for the parents to prepare. Qin Ruoying originally wanted to participate. However, because she had taken the largest portion of the elixir some time ago, if she did not go into seclusion to digest it in time, much of the medicinal effect would be wasted. The adumbra flower was so precious. Wouldn't it be a pity to waste it? Qin Ruoying's aptitude was very ordinary. If she did not rely on external help, then when would she be able to break through to the celestial being level? She had no choice but to repeatedly persuade her. After the little fellow said that she must let her mother have a good rest, Qin Ruoying reluctantly returned to her room and went into seclusion. Qin Ruoying could not be present, and she had other arrangements that day. Therefore, he had to find someone to take care of Nian for him temporarily. This important task, naturally, it fell on his sister-in-law's shoulders. For this, she specially called out his sister-in-law, who was in seclusion. Qin Xueqing had always been impatient with Nian, as if she didn't like children. However, she knew very well. Qin Xueqing was a typical example of a woman who said she didn't want to, but her body reacted honestly. Nian was taken care of by her sister-in-law, but the brothers were in trouble. "I'm sorry, Yao Yao." "I'm sorry." He touched the two brothers' face, looking at them who obviously grew a lot taller. His tear-stained face couldn't help but reveal a trace of smile. "I'm sorry, it's all Daddy's fault, Daddy let you suffer. I'm sorry, Yao Yao, I regret it so much." Xia Kaiji repented painfully, but he didn't know that every word he said now floated into Gu Yao's heart without missing a single word. Guyao came to Xia Kaiji's back as usual, gently hugged him from the back. But it was a pity, Xia Kaiji could no longer feel that kind of feeling from before. Qin quietly returned to the tea house, leaving the warm moment to Xia family's father and son. Sister-in-law sat in the booth, bored to death, flipping through the book as if she was not interested in everything around her. The Christmas party will only start after school. Nian was still in school. The two brothers were taken out by Qin Shi. Qin Xueqing seemed to be dissatisfied with Qin Shi because of this trivial matter, so when she saw Qin Shi came over, she rolled her eyes at Qin Shi, and then turned her body to the side. Seeing this, Qin Shi didn't take it to heart, but directly sat in front of her and smiled and asked, "Let me ask you a question. Why did you say you are cultivating?" Sister-in-law didn't answer. She didn't even bother to lift her eyelids. Qin Shi waited for a while. Seeing that she still didn't speak, he continued to say, "Your so-called cultivation, first of all, is to get rid of the distracting thoughts, not to care about the chaos of the mortal world. Or else, if the heart is not calm, it will mess up your actions. But why do I feel? This kind of cultivation is no different from getting rid of feelings? Humans have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Getting rid of feelings, getting rid of desires? Is that still a human?" After hearing this sentence, Qin Xueqing finally reacted. She looked at Qin Shi with a speechless face, and just as she was about to say something, Qin Shi stood up and walked out. Before she left, Qin Shi didn't even look back as she threw down a sentence. This situation was very similar to the last time they talked. "I'll also leave you with a sentence. Who doesn't cultivate in life? Through the years of wind, frost, rain and snow, feel the mellow and long life, the gains." However, he was tactful and didn't try to talk to Qin Xueqing. After greeting her, he continued to whisper with the two brothers. Xia Kaiji didn't strike up a conversation with Qin Xueqing, but Wang Junqing and Zhao Ziyu couldn't hold it anymore. In front of a peerless beauty as a normal man, how could he not let his imagination run wild? What's more, the two of them had always felt that they were superior. They were rich and powerful, so naturally they wouldn't shrink back just because Qin Xueqing showed a sour face. "Hello, are you Nian's aunt?" Wang Junqing tried to talk to Qin Xueqing with the help of the child. However, before he finished speaking, Qin Xueqing said coldly, "Not interested." After that, Qin Xueqing closed her eyes directly and sat in the classroom with her eyes closed. Wang Junqing was given the cold shoulder and had no choice but to get together with Zhao Ziyu resentfully. Although the two of them were nearly 10 years apart, they had the same bad ideas. Therefore, after giving Wang Junqing a look, Zhao Ziyu secretly took out his cell phone and prepared to secretly take a photo of Qin Xueqing for investigation. However, the moment Zhao Ziyu turned on the camera, a stream of vital essence hit the cell phone, causing the screen to turn off. Zhao Ziyu fiddled with the cell phone for a long time and found that it couldn't be turned on. He had to take a deep look at Qin Xueqing, trying to remember her appearance. Qin Xueqing naturally knew what he was doing, so she opened her eyes and prepared to teach Zhao Ziyu a lesson. However, at this moment, a burst of cheerful music suddenly sounded in the classroom. Ding ding dang, bell ding dang, how happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh. Ding ding dang, bell ding dang, how happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh. The moment the accompaniment of ding ding dang sounded, all the children in the class sang together with the teacher. This was a surprise prepared by the teacher for the parents. The moment the music sounded, the Christmas lights in the classroom were all lit up. After the teacher took out the Christmas spray and sprayed it on the glass, the atmosphere in the classroom was suddenly pushed to the highest point. Every child's face was filled with the most enthusiastic smile. Since it was a parent-child activity, naturally parents and children had to play games together. The content of the game was very simple, which was to ask parents to accompany their children to make a Christmas card. Looking at the scissors, glue, colored pens and socks on the table, Qin Xueqing's expression froze on the spot. When had she ever made these things in her life? But she had no choice. She had already promised Qin Shi that she would take care of Nian for him. Even if Qin Xueqing was unwilling now, she had to be patient and accompany the little girl to pick up the scissors and paintbrush, and began to make the first Christmas card in her life. While teaching everyone how to make a card, the teacher told a short story about Christmas on the podium. The most attractive one was, of course, Santa Claus, who gave gifts to every child on Christmas Eve. After telling the story, the teacher motioned for everyone to stop what they were doing for a while, and then announced loudly, "Children, look who's here, After that, the teacher pointed to the door of the classroom. Then a Santa Claus wearing a red coat and a long white beard appeared outside the door. Santa Claus? The moment Santa Claus appeared, the children were in an uproar. He held a big red bag with many small gifts in it. As soon as he entered the classroom, he began to give the children gifts, and at the same time he gave them an apple that meant peace. Finally, Santa Claus came to the little girl. The little girl eagerly took the apple from the old man's hand, looked up, and found that the face hidden under the beard was particularly familiar. Dad? He was indeed a biological child. Even if Qin was wearing a beard, the little girl still recognized him at a glance. Dad. The little girl excitedly jumped up and was about to go forward and hug Qin, but Qin made a shushing gesture to her. Shoo, don't let others know that Dad is Santa Claus. This is a secret. If you tell others, Dad can't be Santa Claus. Hearing this, the little girl suddenly nodded quickly like a chicken pecking at rice. I won't say. For the little girl, there was obviously nothing more surprising than her father being Santa Claus. The little girl was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth, but her sister-in-law had a speechless expression. She never thought. She asked her to come out and take care of Nian, just to make a cameo appearance as Santa Claus tonight? Did he make a mistake? In fact, since the school proposed the Christmas-themed party, Qin went to discuss with the teacher, hoping that he could make a cameo appearance as Santa Claus. Originally, Santa Claus was to be played by the kindergarten staff, but since there were children's parents who were willing to make a cameo appearance, the teacher naturally wouldn't reject, and so today's event happened. Of course, this secret couldn't be known by the other children, otherwise they would be envious. This was the surprise that Qin specially prepared for Nian. From the little girl's reaction, his goal was achieved. Therefore, the first surprise that Nian experienced in her life. Chapter 395. Since she found out that her father was Santa Claus, the little girl had been very excited. She wanted to share the joy in her heart with the two brothers, but she had scruples about Qin's warning just now, so she could only hold her little face and wriggle with excitement all night. Maybe it was because Qin Xueqing was sitting next to her today, so when the little girl drew the Christmas card, she specially drew it for her. This is Dad. This is Mom. This is Auntie. After drawing the card, the little girl handed the card to Qin Xueqing as if she was presenting a treasure. When Qin Wanqing saw the little red person with a big belly on the card, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. Wasn't this chubby Santa Qin? Looking at Nian's little face that had turned red because of happiness. Suddenly, Qin Xueqing seemed to finally understand Qin's idea. With such a daughter, what more could a man ask for? It was said that a daughter was her father's little lover in his last life, wasn't it, because the first man in the world who saw her smile or cry was her father. The first man in the world who hugged her and kissed her was her father. The first man in the world who dared to say to her that he would always be by her side was also her father. Her father was her daughter's most firm and dependable support, and also the most affectionate and sincere man in the world to her. Only her father would care about her and love her without asking for anything in return. Her father would never be like other men. Yesterday he kept saying that he loved you, but today he would stab you with the sharpest knife. In short, no matter what her father did, he always had only one starting point, and that was for the good of his daughter. As for whether his daughter could feel and understand the strong father's love in it, it was obviously another matter. A father's love was like a mountain, and a mother's love was like water. The mountain was high, mighty, and magnificent. The mountain was high, and the scenery was moving. The water was good, and the flow was meticulous. It was trickling, soft, and flowing continuously. This was a Christmas full of joy and joy. After the cards were finished, the teacher asked the children to give the cards to the people they wanted to give them to the most. Some children, under the guidance of their parents, gave the cards to their teachers. Some of the children gave the cards to their parents. Only the little girl did not do so. Instead, she put the greeting card into her small school bag. The teacher noticed her unusual behavior, so he came to her side and gently asked her who she wanted to give the card to. Hearing this, the little girl stared at her with her big eyes and asked in confusion, "Teacher, didn't you say that if we give the patients a card, they will get better faster? Mom is sick. I want to give this card to my mother. That way Mom will recover faster." After saying that, the little girl patted her school bag like a treasure. It seemed that she had high expectations for this greeting card. She had lied to her that her mother was sick, and the little girl had always kept this matter in her heart. Patients needed more care and attention. This 5-year-old child had already learned how to care for others. Qin Xueqing fell silent. She gently stroked the little fellow's head but didn't say a word, because she finally understood what exactly was his sister searching for back then. 10,000 Holy Valley was too cold. The stubborn feudal clan rules restricted her thoughts. So all along she only had one pursuit in her heart. That was to cultivate, and cultivate again. Why cultivate? To ascend. But wasn't ascension another form of liberation? It was only at this moment that Qin Xueqing truly saw her own heart clearly. She seemed to be strong and decisive, but in fact she was much weaker than Qin Ruoying. At least, her sister could violate the clan rules in order to pursue what she wanted, but she could only numb herself by cultivating day and night. Just like what Qin Shi said, humans had 7 emotions and 6 desires. This was an unavoidable fact. If one extinguished their emotions and desires, would they still be human? Looking at Nianyan's innocent and beautiful smile, Qin Xueqing suddenly felt enlightened. She closed her eyes, and the vital energy in her body suddenly began to flow slowly. Under her influence, a faint breeze suddenly blew through the originally closed doors and windows of the classroom. The wind blew the paper on the picture album on the table, and also gently brushed the faces of all the children. No one noticed that something was wrong with her. This woman with exceptional talent and excellent aptitude. She actually had an epiphany just like that. At this moment, Qin Shi had also changed and returned to the classroom. He noticed that Qin Xueqing was acting strangely, so he immediately set up a restriction to ensure that her epiphany would not be disturbed by the outside world. "Dad, what's wrong with Auntie? Auntie is tired. Let her rest for a while. She'll be fine soon." "Then let's speak softly. Don't disturb Auntie. Good girl, you're sensible." His sister-in-law had an epiphany. After the Christmas party ended, she went home and shut herself in. The secular world tempered her heart, and she took it with equanimity. The world was full of disturbances, and her heart reflected the secular world. Qin Shi just casually gave some advice, but he didn't expect Qin Xueqing to understand it completely. Qin Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry about this. After all, this question was obviously beyond the scope of the syllabus. Perhaps this was what they meant by, "Flowers planted with the intention do not bloom, but willows planted without the intention do." Ever since she found the Earth Soul, Qin Xueqing's cultivation level shot up like a rocket. Qin Ruoying had the best resources, but her cultivation progress was still like a tortoise's crawl. There was no obvious improvement at all. Everyone had their own fate. Fortunately, Qin Ruoying was not a narrow-minded person. Otherwise, she would be depressed to death if she saw this situation. December 31st. It was the last day of the year. Qin Shi waited outside the west wing door, like a father waiting for his child to be born. He paced back and forth in the courtyard, slightly anxious. Suddenly, a strong wave of spirit energy surged out from the west wing. Qin Shi immediately jumped into the room as if he had been electrocuted. As soon as he entered, he saw Qin Ruoying sitting cross-legged on the bed and looking at him with a Ying smile. Qin Ruoying had finally fully digested the effects of the spirit pill and officially came out of seclusion. "Come, Ying, let me see if there are any side effects." As Qin Shi spoke, she moved closer to Qin Ruoying with a bashful face. In fact, Qin Ruoying had only broken through to the diviner stage. It wasn't a forced breakthrough, so how could there be any danger? Qin Shi was taking the opportunity to take advantage of her. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying didn't hesitate. Instead, she offered her red lips and gently pecked Qin Shi's face. "Not enough, not enough. You have to do it here too. In your dreams, not kissing? Then I'll kiss you instead." Stop fooling around. Come on, just one he. They were obviously an old couple, but when the two of them were together they were still as sweet as before. After a round of lovemaking, Qin Ruoying gently leaned on Qin Shi's shoulder and then chatted with him casually. "How has Nianyan been doing during this time?" "Very good. She even made you a greeting card." "When is the school holiday?" "Around the middle of next month." "So soon? Why don't we take Nianyan out for a trip when she's on holiday?" "Where do you want to go?" "Anywhere is fine as long as you're with me." "Okay, you've worked hard during this time. I'll arrange it. When the time comes, let's go on a trip around the world as a family. How about that?" The word cultivation was never the topic of conversation between husband and wife. They preferred to live in the moment and enjoy the sweet time with their family. And this should be the so-called happiness, right? Therefore, the only thing Qin Shi wanted now was to let this happiness continue to last. No one could ruin his happy life. Chapter 396. January 3rd. After the New Year's holiday, Nian and the two brothers reluctantly returned to school. They had a great time during the holiday. The short time he spent with his son made Xia Kaiji experience a kind of happiness that he had never experienced before. Therefore he came to the tea house every day. No matter how Gu Lao gave him a hard time, he acted like nothing had happened and followed the three children around shamelessly. No matter what the children wanted, Xia Kaiji would immediately run to buy it for them. Looking at his eagerness, people who didn't know would think that he had a mistress outside. As a father, Qin could naturally understand Xia Kaiji's feelings, so he didn't deliberately reject him. Instead, he gave him the responsibility of taking care of the children. In this regard, Xia Kaiji certainly couldn't ask for more. Therefore he took the three children to stroll around Hohai every day. There were many people during the holiday. For safety reasons, Qin even let the big cat follow them all the way to prevent the three children from getting lost. With a young and strong nanny like Xia Kaiji, Qin immediately became free. He could finally free up some time to spend a few days with Qin Ruoying in their sweet two-person world. Falling in love, getting married, having children. Each stage would give people different insights. After changing from a two-person world to a three-person world, life would become trivial and repetitive, and there would no longer be the romance when two people were together. Even if 500 years had passed, Qin was still a romantic person. So every morning, as soon as Xia Kaiji took the three children out of the tea house, Qin took Qin Ruoying to start their honeymoon trip. Just as the lyrics say, "I want to take you to romantic Turkey, then go to Tokyo and Paris. Actually, I really like Miami and Los Angeles with black people." Other people traveled by walking, but Qin traveled by flying. In a short span of 3 days, he had brought Qin Ruoying around the earth once. From Asia to Europe, from North America to South America. They rode in Venice and saw the sea in the Aegean Sea. They went to Iceland to enjoy the polar scenery, and then went to Africa to experience the tropical scenery. America's Grand Canyon, Egypt's pyramids, Turkey's Cotton Island, Maldives' Sea of Stars. Everyone had their own experience with traveling. And Qin's experience was, "The world is so big, I only want you by my side." When Yin came home every night, she would happily tell her mother where she had been, but she didn't know. When she was still squeezing around in Shangjing City, her father had already brought her mother to play all over the world. It was a happy holiday, a sweet time that only belonged to mom and dad. The little guy was still young, so he naturally didn't understand the world of adults. Chapter 397. The moment Qin Ruoying fainted, Qin was completely stunned. He subconsciously reached out to support Qin Ruoying, but at the same time he looked up at the sky. It was winter at the moment, but the sky in Shangjing City was blue and white, clear and boundless. The warm winter sun emitted a warm golden light. It should have been a leisurely and comfortable afternoon, but a trace of coldness gradually rose from the bottom of his heart. He picked up Qin Ruoying by the waist and looked at his lover leaning unconsciously on his shoulder. At this moment, his mind was completely blank. Why exactly? Where did the spirit energy tide appear? Why didn't he notice any abnormalities? Qin gently placed Qin Ruoying on the bed. Then he sat cross-legged next to his lover. Without any hesitation, he directly took out the soul crystal, and then used the amplification effect of the soul crystal to greatly enhance the strength of his divine soul. At the same time, the restrictions that Qin had set up all over the world seemed to have been stimulated by something. They suddenly expanded a lot, and the area they covered almost doubled. One after another, the perceptual restrictions were like a big net that covered the sky. The moment the big net opened, Qin's consciousness also spread out. In his perception, the whole world was quiet, so calm that there was not a trace of ripple. Qin did not believe it, so he mobilized his divine soul with all his strength, trying to bring the whole earth into his perception range. However, how big was the earth? The 7 continents only occupied 29% of the area, and the remaining 71% was all ocean. Qin was already struggling to perceive the 29% of the land, so how could he forcibly perceive the rest of the ocean? This was not a battle, and it had nothing to do with the accumulation of true essence. It was purely relying on the perception of the divine soul. This level of consumption had completely exceeded the limit of what he could bear. Therefore, after holding on for a few minutes, Shi's 7 orifices began to strangely bleed. Fortunately, Nian was not at home at the moment. Otherwise, wouldn't she be frightened by his current appearance? Shi gritted his teeth and persevered for a long time. In the end, because his spirit was unable to bear the burden, he had no choice but to stop this dangerous action. There was no sign of the tide surging, but Qin Ruoying still fainted because of dizziness. No matter how slow-witted Shi was, he should have figured out the reason by now. It turned out that he had been looking in the wrong direction. Previously, whenever Qin Ruoying felt dizzy, it must be when the tide was surging and the gate of heaven was about to open. This also made Shi fall into a misunderstanding, thinking that Yingying's illness was related to all of this. In fact, the spirit qi tide was a blessing given to cultivators by the heavens. How could it bring bad effects to people? The crux of the problem was not because of the spirit energy tide, but because sky-bearing art, floating dawn mirror. Every time the tide surged, the people behind the heavenly gate would take out the heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror. Although he was not clear about the true use of this treasure, there was no doubt that, once Qindu used the sky-bearing art, Xiannu, who was in the lower realm, would definitely be affected. Xiannu. The name sounded good, but in reality, they were just a bunch of pitiful cannon fodder. After thinking through this point, Shi stopped all of his meaningless actions and quietly sat beside Qin Ruoying. He quietly looked at his lover's face, hoping that the first thing she saw when she woke up would be him. Unfortunately, Qin Ruoying did not wake up. It was as if she was asleep. Her breathing was slightly weak, but the frequency was orderly. Shi waited silently. But this time, Qin Ruoying was unconscious for a much longer time than the last time. As the light in the room dimmed bit by bit, it meant that the sun was about to set. Ring ring ring, suddenly a melodious ringtone sounded. It was Shi's cell phone. At this moment, as if he had just woken up from a dream, he suddenly realized, Nian was out of school. As expected, the moment Shi picked up the phone, the little fellow's sweet voice sounded from the other end of the phone. "Daddy, where are you? We're out of school. Daddy was delayed by something. I'll come pick you up now. Wait for Daddy for 1 more minute, okay?" "Okay." After hanging up the phone, Shi lowered his head to look at his lover who was still in a deep sleep. After gently kissing her forehead, Shi's figure suddenly disappeared from the room. When he appeared again, he was already outside the school gate. "Daddy. Daddy. Daddy. Daddy is here to pick me up. Goodbye, teacher." As usual, the moment the little fellow saw Shi immediately raised her little hand, stepped forward and ran towards him excitedly. After Shi picked up the little fellow from the ground, the 2 brothers who had been following the little fellow finally relaxed and waved goodbye to the little fellow reluctantly. The 2 of them were now picked up by Xia Kaiji's car every day. Naturally, they did not have to trouble Shi every day. "Daddy. Teacher taught us how to sing today." "And? What song?" "Two Tigers." After saying that, the little fellow grinned very proudly. If it was in the past, Shi would definitely accompany her to sing all the way home. However, to the little fellow's disappointment, Shi just nodded casually today, and then there was nothing else. Seeing this, the little fellow was obviously a little unhappy. Just as she was about to flare up, the little fellow suddenly seemed to have thought of something, so she immediately shut her little mouth and quietly lay on Shi's shoulder. Chapter 398. The little fellow was sensible. In addition to knowing not to cause trouble for Dad, she even learned how to comfort Dad. Therefore, after Nian entered that sweet dreamland, Shi let out a soft sigh in this dark room. "Dad, don't be sad, Mom will get better." The little fellow had already fallen asleep, but her words kept echoing in Shi's ears. Shi silently savored this sentence. After a long time, he was like the prince who kissed Snow White in the fairy tale, kissing the little fellow and Qin Ruoying's face one by one, then got up and left the room. As soon as he opened the door, a cold wind mixed with snowflakes suddenly hit his face. It started to snow in Shangjing City again. Shi withdrew his vital essence, allowing the cold wind to wantonly enter his sleeves, and silently felt the chill brought by the cold wind. The whole sky was dark. There was only a little bit of weak moonlight, which seemed so cold. Shi set up a restriction in the room so that he could know the situation of Qin Ruoying at the first moment. Then he flew directly into the dark night sky. He flew very fast, and in the blink of an eye he had already flown out of Wuxia and arrived above the Pacific Ocean. And the destination of his trip Obviously, it was the waterless cave located in the deep sea. Deep in the cave, Bai Hong and Qing Wan were still like suffering Jesus, hanging high above the cave by Qin Shi. Qin Shi didn't want to kill indiscriminately, so he kept them here. Because of the suppression of the spirit needles and spirit-piercing needles, the injuries of the two people did not get any treatment, but worsened a lot, so they looked very bad. Being in prison was actually a very terrifying thing, especially this kind of cage that was similar to a small dark room. Unable to see the sun, unable to communicate with people. In this cramped and oppressive space, the most frightening and tormenting thing was actually loneliness. Qing Wan's injuries were more serious, so she could only be awake for about 2 or 3 hours a day, and at other times she was in a self-protective coma. Qin Shi came at the right time today just when Qing Wan was awake. Bai Hong and Qing Wan were talking in a low voice. As soon as they heard the movement caused by Qin Shi flying out of the cold pool, a trace of fear flashed across their faces. Yes, Divine General Tiandu was also afraid. After a long period of confinement, they had developed a fear of Qin Shi. They were not afraid of death, but they were afraid of this endless loneliness. Come. Kill me. Kill me. The moment Qin Shi appeared, Qing Wan was like an enraged beast, crazily roaring at Qin Shi. As he roared, he spat at Qin Shi in an attempt to infuriate Qin Shi so that she would kill him. Do you want to die so much? Then I to you, Qing to Tiandu to Tiandu to be to kill to Tiandu to die to be killed. Then a stream of qi like a heavy hammer smashed into Qing Wan's chest. Qing Wan was already injured, and after suffering such a heavy blow, she immediately spat out a large mouthful of blood. She could only hang her head weakly, and it seemed that she had lost half of her life. Stop. You're going to kill him like this. Seeing this, Bai Hong could not help but be anxious. Although she also had the idea of dying early and being free, it was just a thought. Even ants craved for life, not to mention them, the divine generals. Bai Hong did not want to die, and was even more unwilling to see Qing Wan die in front of her. Qin Shi would not come for no reason. Today he suddenly came, there must be something to ask. Therefore, after a strong struggle in her mind, Bai Hong asked in a tone that was close to begging for mercy, "What do you want to know? As long as it does not involve the core of Tiandu, I can tell you without reservation." Is that so? Hearing this, Qin Shi smiled with satisfaction. But that smile, it looked a little cold. I want to know everything about the sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror. Can you tell me? As he spoke, Qin Shi slowly rose from the ground, and then flew straight to Qing Wan. He was obviously talking to Bai Hong, but he used his qi to lift Qing Wan's head, and began to size up this poor divine general who was covered in wounds. Bai Hong of course understood what Qin Shi meant. If she kept silent, Qin Shi would obviously use the soul-sucking technique on Qing Wan. Seeing this, Bai Hong replied rather straightforwardly, "Sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror? No problem, I can tell you. That is the treasure left behind by the divine ancestor. We now call it Soul Mirror." Soul Mirror? Qin Shi repeated this name, then frowned and asked, "What is its use?" Hearing this, Bai Hong immediately answered honestly, "The 5 great temples and the 13 soul-gathering cauldrons are all related to the Soul Mirror. Simply put, you can see it as the key to open the gate of heaven. Don't blame me for not telling you. Although the Soul Mirror is a treasure, it has no practical use. Apart from when it is needed to open the gate of heaven, it can only be placed in the Imperial Hall as a decoration." Bai Hong thought that Qin Shi was after the divine ancestor's treasure, so she couldn't help but remind him. However, after hearing this, Qin Shi continued to ask, "If I were to ascend from the lower realm and enter the gate of heaven, where would I appear? Where is the Imperial Hall? Who is usually in charge of the Soul Mirror? What is this person's cultivation? Are there any other defensive arrangements around it?" Bai Hong was stunned by Qin Shi's series of questions. He stared blankly at Qin Shi for a long while before saying in shock, "You're actually thinking about the Soul Mirror?" Qin Shi roared impatiently, "Answer my question." Bai Hong was really scared. Looking at Qin Shi's attitude, he really wanted to go to the Imperial Hall to snatch the Soul Mirror? What kind of place was the Imperial Hall? That was the core of the divine capital, equivalent to the Emperor's throne room. Are you crazy? Bai Hong looked at Qin Shi speechlessly. At this moment, Qin Shi looked like a bloodthirsty gambler. Seeing that Bai Hong was unwilling to answer, he actually pressed his hand on Qing Wan's head and used the soul-snatching technique. In fact, the soul-snatching technique was not as exaggerated as Qin Shi had said before. This technique had a lot of restrictions. After using it, one could only inquire about some insignificant surface information. If it involved important secrets, the target soul would automatically hide it, making the caster unable to pry. Since Qing Yuan was a divine general of the divine capital, he obviously had a detailed understanding of the layout of the Imperial Hall. To Qing Yuan, the Imperial Hall was no secret at all. Naturally, it would not be deliberately protected by his soul. Qin Shi, who sensed the abnormality, hurriedly withdrew his secret technique and took Bai Hong's palm strike head-on. Bang! In an instant, there was a violent explosion in the cave. Qin Shi was actually forced to retreat more than 10 meters. Are you crazy? Looking at this divine general of Tiandu who was on the verge of going crazy, it was Qin Shi's turn to be surprised. Bai Hong is burning his own Yuanying. Yuanying was the result of a cultivator's painstaking cultivation, and it was also the foundation of their abilities. Even if they died, as long as their Yuanying was not extinguished, a cultivator would still have a chance to be reborn. Therefore, for a cultivator, Yuanying represented everything even more important than life. Burning Yuanying meant giving up everything that he had worked so hard for hundreds or even thousands of years. This kind of damage was irreversible. Once his Yuanying was burned out, even if Bai Hong was lucky enough to survive today, he would not be able to cultivate from now on. And for a cultivator, what was the difference between this and death? Bai Hong simply wanted to fight to the death with Qin Shi, not stopping until one of them was dead. Seeing this, Qin Shi finally calmed down. After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, he asked in a slightly strange tone, "Burning Yuanying? Since you're so desperate, then I admit defeat, okay? Actually, I didn't want to kill you. This secret technique won't harm your life, it's just to scare you. How about this, let's talk nicely? Admit defeat?" Hearing this, Bai Hong could not help but be stunned. But after thinking about it, he thought that Qin Shi was deliberately stalling for time, so he immediately attacked Qin Shi again. Seeing this, Qin Shi uncharacteristically turned around and ran. He had no intention of fighting with Bai Hong at all. Trying to be a hero depended on the situation. Since Bai Hong had already burned his Yuanying, Qin Shi only needed to temporarily avoid the attack. After half an hour, Bai Hong would probably collapse because of his Yuanying. Bai Hong clearly knew this, so he wanted to fight to the death with Qin Shi before his Yuanying burned out. But what he did not expect was, Qin Shi was running faster than a rabbit at this moment. His cultivation level was much higher than Bai Hong's. Now that he was determined to run, how could Bai Hong easily catch up to him? Thus, the two of them began a game of cat and mouse in the deep sea. Qin Shi was like walking a dog on an electric scooter. From time to time, he would turn around and send a voice transmission to Bai Hong, "Calm down, let's talk nicely. If you stop now, you should still be saved. You saw it too, if I'm determined to run, you won't be able to catch me at all. I advise you not to be so stubborn. When the nascent soul is burned up, I will be able to decide whether I want to kill him or not." When we came, junior brother was still cultivating with master. Now that we haven't returned to Tiandu yet, I'm sure master will personally come down to check. When that time comes, junior brother might come with him. Alright, what's your junior brother's name? I'll make a note of it so that I can find him in the future. He's called Wuxia. What? Wuxia? The moment she heard this name, Qin Shi's entire body felt unwell. Chapter 400. Even if Bai Hong burned his Yuanying, he was still no match for Qin Shi. Qin Shi avoided him because he did not want to waste his energy. After all, if he could solve the problem peacefully, why would he need to resort to violence? The result was, of course, a happy ending. Bai Hong's life was saved, and Qin Shi also got the answer he wanted. However, the moment he got the answer, Qin Shi did not feel good. The sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror was actually in Wuxia's hands? If he had known this would happen, Qin Shi would have left Wuxia on Daiyu Island even if he burned his Yuanying that day. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. Wuxia had already escaped, and at this moment he might be hiding in some dark corner of the earth, laughing secretly. Now that things had come to this, Qin Shi's regret was useless. Therefore, he could only hope that he could successfully find Wuxia and get the soul mirror from him. Since Yingying's illness was related to the soul mirror, he had to get the soul mirror no matter what method he used. For this reason, Qin Shi even had the dangerous idea of fighting his way to Tiandu. In fact, Qin Shi did not want to be enemies with anyone. Just like what he taught Yin Yin on a daily basis. We do not cause trouble, but we are definitely not afraid of trouble. And this was also his daily principle. I avoided it only because I had a family. I did not want my family to take any unknown risks. The money, status, and power of the mortal world were meaningless to Qin Shi. Similarly, the rare treasures, cultivation techniques, and elixirs of the cultivation world were also dispensable to Qin Shi. After all, with Yin Yin and Ying Ying he already had the whole world. Why should he care about these worldly possessions? Qin Shi wanted to avoid the world. Not escape but avoid. Avoid all unnecessary trouble. But unfortunately, avoiding was not the way to solve the problem. Since the problem had already appeared, Qin Shi could only think of a way to solve it. Fighting was not the only way to solve the problem. If it wasn't necessary, Qin Shi wasn't willing to make enemies everywhere. Therefore he tried to communicate with Bai Hong, hoping to find another way to solve this problem from Bai Hong. Otherwise, Qin Shi might really have to fight all the way from the Heavenly Gate to the Imperial Extreme Hall. Bai Hong understood the situation. When he learned of Qin Shi's motives, he no longer tried to obstruct him. On the contrary, he hoped that Qin Shi could smoothly obtain the soul mirror and thus resolve the illness plaguing Qin Ruoying, thereby forming a good relationship with Heaven Capital. Didn't Bai Hong resent Qin Shi? Obviously it was impossible. However, he had no choice but to lower his head under the eaves. Churchill once said, "There are no eternal friends in this world, nor are there eternal enemies, only eternal interests." Since the two of them had reached a preliminary consensus, the next priority was, obviously he wanted to find Wuxia. But in this vast sea of people, where should he go to find her? For this reason, after a serious discussion between Qin Shi and Bai Hong, they finally found a more reliable method. That was, Bai Hong appeared and used divine telekinesis to lure Wuxia out. It was equivalent to humans sending signals to space to search for aliens. Qin Shi circled the world with Bai Hong, and Bai Hong continuously released divine telekinesis to lure Wuxia out. No matter what, the two of them were fellow disciples and had a close relationship. With Bai Hong as a guarantor, Wuxia should be able to boldly show up. This method had a certain degree of feasibility. Therefore, Bai Hong and Qing Wan temporarily broke away from their prisoner status and became Qin Shi's friends. Naturally, he couldn't treat his friends too badly. Therefore, Qin Shi brought Bai Hong and Qing Wan to Kangju district and temporarily settled them here. For safety reasons, Qin Shi didn't remove the seal in Qing Wan's body. He only relieved her internal injuries and gave her the right to move freely. After that, Qin Shi began to tour the world with Bai Hong overnight. Bai Hong's divine telekinesis range was limited, so she could only release it bit by bit. The whole process was like a salesperson sweeping the floor. She needed to go door to door to hand out business cards. This was a very long process. Qin Shi roughly calculated the time. Even if he flew with Bai Hong, it would take at least 3 months for Bai Hong to use divine telekinesis to sweep the world. 3 months, so be it. It was much better than being at a loss for what to do. Therefore, for the next period of time, Qin Shi still sent the little girl to and from school on time during the day and took care of her daily life. At night, after the little girl fell asleep, he would start to tour the world with Bai Hong. During this period, Bai Hong was very cooperative and didn't play any tricks the whole time. But Qin Shi's mood was getting heavier and heavier day by day. Because Qin Ruoying had not woken up. Ying Ying's coma time was far beyond Qin Shi's imagination. Her breathing didn't stop, and the vital essence in her body was still circulating on its own. Everything was normal, but she couldn't wake up and looked like a vegetable. Bai Hong had never seen such a situation. He didn't know much about the Siming Xian Nu, so he could only persuade Qin Shi not to worry too much. As long as they found the soul mirror, everything would naturally be solved. Both of them placed their hopes on Wuxia. But they didn't know, Bai Hong's divine telekinesis had already attracted the attention of Jiang Yan and the others. This kind of indiscriminate divine telekinesis coverage was definitely undetectable by ordinary people. But in the eyes of Jiang Yan and the others, this was equivalent to holding a loudspeaker and shouting at the entrance of a village all day long, "Wuxia, Wuxia, where are you? Come out, I have something to talk to you about." Because of this, Jiang Yan even pretended to call Qin Shi to ask. Although they were allies, Qin Shi was still wary of this old man, so he didn't tell him the truth. He only said that he wanted to find Wuxia to prevent future trouble. Jiang Yan naturally didn't believe Qin Shi's excuse. Therefore, this old man continued to follow Qin Shi for a long time and accurately guessed Qin Shi's true purpose. For Jiang Yan, Qin Shi was a great help in overturning Qindu, so he naturally couldn't let this help become a hindrance. So Ijiang Yen began to act. No one had ever noticed this mysterious organization. It was called the Nine Serenities. There were 9 heavens in the sky and 9 layers of earth. There was Tiandu above and the 9 Serenities below. Ever since the divine ancestor led the generals of Tiandu to ascend to the great world, the sinners left behind in the lower realm were full of hatred and formed this mysterious organization. Compared to Tiandu, its strength was too insignificant. After all, they could only watch the spiritual qi dry up and witness the arrival of the end of the world. They used to be high and mighty cultivators, but now they were like maggots in the gutter. Even becoming a diviner required a great opportunity. They could be as humble as dust, but they couldn't be as twisted as maggots. The resentment that had accumulated for thousands of years? It wasn't until the emergence of the first spiritual qi tide that they finally had the opportunity to release it. The generals of Tiandu didn't even know that there was such a reactionary organization in the lower realm. But the people of the 9 Serenities had already made an oath. They only lived to overturn Tiandu and avenge the suffering of thousands of years of repression. The 9 Serenities had begun to plan a long time ago. In addition to constantly sending people to Tiandu as spies, the rest of the people were silently waiting for the opportunity. For this reason, they would rather endure hundreds or even thousands of years of loneliness and torture, just to wait for the right time. Now the time had come, and they only lacked the opportunity to blow the horn. And Qinshi. Chapter 402. There was no day in Longzhirali city, only 24 hours of night. This was a pure land located in the far north, the only city in the world where death was illegal. But today, this pure land was destined to be dyed red with blood. Under the long polar night, Longzhirali city was filled with a romantic atmosphere. This was the best time for the town's bar business. The bar music was turned up to the maximum, almost deafening people's ears. Tourists from all over the world were affected by the atmosphere and started to dance crazily on the dance floor. The air was filled with the smell of hormones. A coldly dressed woman mixed in with the crowd of men, laughing and joking. She used flirtatious words to tease the men who couldn't control themselves. When the man wanted to take a step further, the woman was like a slippery loach running to another target. The woman shuttled back and forth in the crowd. Suddenly, she saw the Asian man sitting by the bar. This man was very strange. He was only wearing a strange long robe and a thin layer of clothing. The woman guessed which country's traditional clothing was from, and her interest was piqued little by little. Since he was used to eating Western food, it would be a good experience to change his tastes once in a while. The woman treated this man as her prey tonight and sat directly next to him. There were no blondes in Tiandu. Therefore, Wushu couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly when he sensed the woman approaching him. Interesting. Even though they didn't speak the same language, the woman's ambiguous aura floated into Wushu's eyes. If it was in the past, Wushu definitely wouldn't have any interest in this kind of ant-like existence. But today was different, he was here to relax. Therefore, Wushu imitated the others and pulled the woman into his arms. The woman smiled proudly as if she was very satisfied with her charm. However, just as the woman was about to offer her red lips and have a beautiful encounter with this mysterious Asian man, Wushu's figure mysteriously disappeared from her side. The woman was stunned for a few seconds before she let out a heart-wrenching scream. At the same time, Wushu's figure suddenly appeared above the town. It was snowing heavily outside the house and the cold wind was bone-chilling. The visibility was less than 10 meters, but Wushu's line of sight was firmly fixed on the southeast direction. There was an extremely powerful Zhen Yuan fluctuation at that location, and Wushu also sensed a trace of hostility from this wave. It was obvious that they were here for him. Seeing this, Wushu did not cower. Instead, he flew towards that direction. This was a huge iceberg that had not melted for 10,000 years. It floated on the Arctic Ocean, moving slowly with the waves. Before Wushu got close, he saw a man standing on the peak of the ice mountain with his hands behind his back. In order to show the spirit of universal love of the divine ancestor, Tiandu had always maintained contact with the 5 places of inheritance so that these sinners could ascend to Tiandu in the future. And this was also the fundamental reason why All Saints Valley was able to use the spirit gathering formation to forcibly summon divine generals from Heaven Capital when Qin Shi flattened them. Absolutely no one would have thought the so-called 5 lands of heritage were actually branches of the 9 serenities, but this secret was only known to a few people. Everything was under the control of the 9 serenities, including Qin Shi, the apple that accidentally fell on the chessboard. Since he was on the chessboard, he was a chess piece. It was just that this chess piece was much bigger than the others. From the moment Qin Shi stepped into All Saints Valley, Jiang Yin had already known of Qin Shi's existence. Although he was a variable, he was controllable. This was why Jiang Yin had displayed an almost abnormal enthusiasm for Qin Shi when Qin Shi first set foot on Daiyu Island. It was a pleasure to have a friend from afar. Jiang Yin was guiding Qin Shi, trying to pull Qin Shi to the opposite side of Tiandu. After all, the only advantage the 9 serenities had was probably information. The enemy was in the light while I was in the dark. Jiang Yin did not know why Qin Shi was working so hard to find Wuxia. But he knew very well that Wuxia was not just a divine general. Wuxia, he was actually Yuhuan Tianzuan's only son. If they could successfully kill Wuxia, who would face Yuhuan Tianzuan's wrath? It would not be Jiang Yin, nor would it be the 9 serenities. It would be Qin Shi, who had always been at the forefront. Wuxia's identity was not a secret. Almost everyone in the great world knew about it. This guy had been outstanding since he was young, but he was mischievous and disliked cultivation. Yuhuan Tianzuan could not do anything about him, so he handed him over to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, hoping that Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells could guide this mischievous second generation back to the right path. But he did not teach his own son. The consequences were, after Wuxia grew up, he did not recognize him as his father. No matter the occasion, Wuxia would always call him Yuhuan Tianzuan, which almost angered him to death. In fact, from the respect Wuxia showed to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, Wuxia was actually quite a sentimental person. The reason why he made Yuhuan Tianzuan angry was probably because he had a special father-son relationship with Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan probably knew this too. So even though he was usually cold to Wuxia, he was secretly very concerned about this son of his. Through Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, he indirectly gave Wuxia all kinds of Dharma treasures. This was a very strange father-son relationship. It seemed distant, but it was also very close.